My name is Leslie Lancelotti. I am an international trade advisor for the Ministry of Energy. It's a pleasure to be here in the facilities of the National Electric Coordinator to collaborate as a master of ceremony in this event. This is the first regional event from this series of solutions dialogues performed in different places in the world that gathers government and leaders from the business world, from the civil society to increase the action to eliminate gradually the generation of electricity coming from carbon and to maintain the objective of reducing global warming. We expect for this dialogue to allow governments and other interest parties to obtain information and the support they require to overcome challenge of gradual reduction of carbon related to the anticipated removal of centrals, the organization of a fair removal and fair transition. And so these are important topics this year because we wait for these solutions to help the governments to compromise in a more ambitious way and to start politics and necessary plans to back up the following contributions that have been nationally determined and long-term strategies for net zero. So this event has been organized together with PPCA Secretariat, the Ministry of Energy in Chile, with collaboration of GAS, the embassies from Germany, Canada, and the United Kingdom, and with support of the National Coordinator that receives you today in their home. About PPCA. A PPCA is a global coalition that promotes the transition of carbon energy to clean energy. Among its members, we have 182 national governments and subnational governments and companies and $1.4 billion in investment in the hands of financial institutions. Now currently, among the members, we have 84% of the countries of OECD and the European Union and also 9 countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. This alliance provides a platform to help to fix ambitious goals, share good practices among members, and block international trading. This year, PPCA will focus on supporting governments and financial institutions and also companies for them to take over ambitious commitments, and this is done mainly through 2 main initiatives. Solutions dialogues that I mentioned before, and the Commission for Carbon Transition, Coal Transition Commission, that is at the service of the Carbon Transition Accelerator. It is an initiative launched by France together with other governments and different organizations to unblock financing sources that are public and private that will facilitate the transition to clean energy. I want to present my regards and thank Juan Carlos Olmedo, President of the Directive Council of the National Electric Coordinator, and I invite you, Mr. Olmedo, to give us some welcoming remarks. Good morning, Mr. Minister of Energy, Chile. This is also British Ambassador from Chile. François Deval from Canada. Nigeria from Germany. Representatives from unions, companies, and members of the academia. For the National Electric Coordinator, it's an honor to make this meeting in our facilities. They are the heart of the national electric system. Our electric system is in an accelerated transformative process with a high percentage of renewable energies penetration and a sustained decrease of intensity of coal for electric energy. In the last 5 years has decreased in 33%. Today it is one of the lowest one in the world and similar levels to the United Kingdom. As a national electric coordinator from our role and action environment, we are working to make this process in a reliable, resilient, and safe way in order to achieve a sustainable energy transition that will achieve all citizens humanized in this process. In order to achieve this objective, we have elaborated a roadmap with the aspects that are necessary to work to operate an electric system that can supply demand with 100% of renewable energies in some hours of the day in 2030. Among our recent actions, we highlight the bidding for the installation of synchronous condensators to revitalize the removal of carbon central stations in the center of the country that will be in service in 2026. The removal of carbon centers was initiated in July 2019. Due to the agreements achieved by the Ministry of Energy, Ms. Susana Jimenez, leading the subscription of voluntary agreements for the owner companies of the centrals for the progressive removal of them in 2040. However, what is happening, however, in an accelerated way and much faster than what was initially predisposed. Hopefully, today's session will be fruitful for the work that is being performed by Power and Plus Alliance. And this afternoon, we will invite you to meet the control center, where electric energy is managed from Arica to Chiloé, that was thought of to face the challenges of century 2021 and for the energy transition. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to invite Minister Diego Pardo, who will be providing some welcoming remarks.
Good morning, everyone. When I assumed this position a couple of years ago in the Ministry of Energy, one of the first activities that I got to see was participating in the closure of Unit 15 in Tocopilla. I think I was 5 days in the position. And you get to see this event in a very naive way. And what I thought it was very curious, very funny, is that they were celebrating the closure of something. There are cultures around the world where funerals are very joyful, but it's not the usual in the Western culture. And when you close something, when something finishes, is a problem that you take with all seriousness, not necessarily with joy. And as the process has moved forward, I think that we better understand why this initial intuition has been getting better, because the difficulties that the closure process has in the accelerated fashion that we see in Chile, and this is a state policy, but I think it's important whenever you talk about these kinds of policies, there's a lot of good things, and you also have to learn the lessons learned. That is the only way that this is going to keep working. And from this standing point, the 2 years that have led this process, I would say that the main challenge that we faced was very understandable given how we started. Because as Juan Carlos said, this is a challenge that started as a voluntary agreement, essentially as an agreement between companies in which the government took an organizing position as a facilitator of the agreement. And this has generated several limitations. The first is the order in which the centrals were being disconnected, like Docamina, I remember that with Juan Pablo, were centrals that have been dispatched because of efficiency. So this is a project that started with high expectations, but it was easier to disconnect something that doesn't work. And that's not a huge problem because there's not a lot to replace. And it's not a big social issue because not a large economic activity. The central closes, and it's because it doesn't have any coal in ports and it doesn't require maintenance. So all services associated to this are already gone. So the first centrals that have been on retreat, the festive spirit was, of course, more difficult. And it was more difficult from a technological point of view, because when you disconnect base energy, you have to find a way to replace it. And it's a technological difference between clean energy, this intermittent, and fossil energy, which is base energy, and you need to close this gap. Secondly, you need to be very careful with the expectations that you create in communities. Initially, for example, when some units were retired, this was not addressed to communities. And when we started working with the central, we had to address the conflict with a with more strength than before. So relationship with communities and a technological challenge, and of course the challenge of fair transition, just transition, particularly with the workforce, is something that needs to be visible in the lessons that we've learned. Because this is a voluntary agreement of companies, because companies reach their own workforce. But we've found, for example, in Tocopilla, as we've been taking down more units, we've seen that there's a lot of economic activities in this place. And all these problems have to do with direct workforce of the company, where there's a multitude of stakeholders, of port activity, of contractors providing services. That needs to be addressed with public policies. This is why, and on this intuition, along with professionals with the ministry, we decided to have a space to rethink our strategy when it comes to closing coal centrals, which is what we've been doing, what we've been participating. Because it was important for these lessons to be put on the table and to be permanently discussed, to see the terms and to be able to anticipate all closings by 2040. And of course, eliminating emissions is a first line objective, but this needs to be done with a joint work with communities, and it needs to be done in a way that what comes after what it dies needs to be better. But unfortunately, in Tocopilla, we've seen a lot of renewable energy projects from plants. We have owners, and we've been placing batteries nearby. If these processes could be overlapped with the relationships with communities, this movement would have been easier. And the same thing happens with our encouragement to green hydrogen. If we are able to overlap, because there's a geographic, natural overlapping of several places where there are coal plants, where green hydrogen tends to find production centers. So finding a way of overlapping, if you need to reuse the structure and the sites, that because of how old plants are, they don't have mandatory activity. But if you can repurpose these assets, we must find a way of doing so, and also to include this workforce that represents the middle class of these places. So it's crucial to approach this differently. And something that's also important to see reflected in our public policies is that the word reconversion hides many situations. And reconversion to biomass is very different than a battery, for example. And biomass represents the conflict of closings that is lower, but not necessarily means the reconversion of coal plants that take other kinds of energies. So if we use the same word, if you use the same policy, it's going to be very difficult to guide all the efforts of private investment, if that's what we want, which is the other formula of reconversion. So when we have this process of decarbonization, we can see that this has been a process that's important to see it as it is. It's a glass half full. It's a journey, but it's also a glass. There are positive things, reducing emissions in a 33%, which is great news, especially for communities, neighboring communities of these thermoelectrical plants. And it has an impact on public health. And a recent study that has been carried out shows it. And there are also huge challenges of how public policy goes hand in hand with all of this. Also, great challenges in public policies on how we involve communities in working tables. They need to be a part of this. So we're just in the middle of this process. And I hope that from this work table that we've created, all the lessons can be seen and that we can reflect public policies that reflect these lessons. And see it with optimism, because this process needs to be faced with optimism. And also, let's be accountable, because this process and these kinds of public policies requires it. Thank you. And particularly, thank you to the PPCA. I have my pin on me, part of the alliance. And we've learned so much from other countries. And there's a lot of teachings to be communicated to other countries. So thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for your attendance, for your words. Now we wish to invite the ambassador from the United Kingdom, Chile, to comment some words. Good morning and welcome to all of you, especially the Minister, Mr. Diego Pablo, and Mr. François Laverture and Thomas Rich, who will be joining us in the welcoming remarks to this morning. I appreciate Mr. Juan Carlos Olmedo, President of the National Electric Coordinator, for lending his home and the organizing people from the event. Science is clear. Energy coming from carbon continues to be the largest source of carbon emissions, CO2, connected to energy on a global level and must be eliminated first and faster to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. For this reason, in 2017, in the United Kingdom associated to Canada, to found with the co-president of PASCO Alliance. For temperature not to increase more than 1.5 degrees, the world needs that for 2014 to eliminate gradually all energy plants, carbon energy plants that are operating. In average, this requires the removal of at least 2 carbon plants per week. In the following 17 years. This is a main great challenge, and it is still not happening. Historically, carbon has been so important in the energy mix of United Kingdom, and at a given moment provided 97% of all of our electricity. However, the United Kingdom has heard the science and has acted rapidly. In 2012, the use of carbon represented over 40% of our electricity production. In 2024, in 12 years if placed in 0%. The minister spoke about the path, a difficult path, where many countries are. We are in the ends of this path, and it is a celebration that October the 1st this year, the United Kingdom will close the last carbon electric central in Radcliffe and Soar that has been operating since 1967. Now, this is a historical moment, this closing, to celebrate this legacy of carbon, the Industrial Revolution, and workers and communities that have promoted it. But it is also the moment to visualize towards a future promoted by clean energy and high quality green employments. We have clarity that international leadership begins with a strong internal action. The history of gradual elimination of carbon in the United Kingdom is a visible example of this. According to the World Resource Institute, we have managed the second gradual elimination of carbon energy, the fastest one in the world, only surpassed by Greece. From the conception, Power Coastal Alliance, in 2016, the alliance has grown to 180 members, including 60 countries, all of them committed with carbon transition towards clean energy. We have important partners here in South America and the whole world, including Chile, of course, France, the United States, Germany, Colombia, and Dominican Republic. However, the most recent evidence of Global Energy Monitor shows that carbon capacity will continue to increase in 2% on a global level, and some countries, such as China, continue to put in line new carbon generation. If gradual elimination of carbon energy has begun in the world, yes, this must be accelerated. We need for all countries to add up to have a global change. We cannot work alone. We are focusing our efforts not only in the country but also abroad through concrete actions such as the co-presidency of Power and Pascal Alliance and the construction of a Clean Energy Alliance. We want to work in collaboration with international partners. We want to celebrate success. We want to share, learn lessons. Today, I leave with each one of you a challenge to communicate the message about the importance and urgency of eliminating carbon with active agents of change to guarantee for us to keep a better world, to leave a better world for future generations. Thank you. Hopefully this event will be very fruitful. Thank you so much, Ambassador. Now we have today Mr. Fonso Lavertu, in charge of businesses from the Canadian Embassy in Chile. The floor is all yours. Diego Pardo, Minister of Energy, colleagues, dear participants, good morning, everyone, all of you. I begin these words by thanking the organizing committee of this event, Powering Past Coal Alliance, Just Transition in Coal Regions platform, and the Ministry of Energy in Chile, for inviting us to share some reflections with you and for everybody for attending. Last year, COP28 had a global community committed to historical agreement to fossil fuels. Para este compromiso tenemos que tener fuentes de carbono, que son el carbón. La ciencia nos muestra que esto se requiere para mantener 1.5 grados y no estamos en el track. Para volver al camino tenemos que enfrentar el carbón y dejar de construir esta capacidad. Cambiar. Este cambio no será fácil y debe entregar energía costeable Esta alianza está liderando el camino y nos está mostrando cómo podemos lograr esta transición. Este año, el PPCA ha tratado de tener una serie de diálogos para demostrar que hay soluciones prácticas listas para poder implementar el carbón en el sector de la energía. Necesitamos que todos den un paso para dejar el carbón atrás y hacer una transición a un futuro más sostenible y más limpio. Con 180 miembros, esta alianza está lista para poder apoyar esa transición. Canadá está trabajando colectivamente en casa, así que estamos tratando de tener medidas regulatorias para poder llegar a una electricidad, un sistema de electricidad de energía. En el 2035 tenemos un precio en el carbón para poder reducir las emisiones y luego corregir la innovación. Y hemos establecido un presupuesto en el 2024 que incluye ciertas medidas para poder promover la Canadá para cero neto en el 2025, como por ejemplo cadena de abastecimiento de vehículos eléctricos y también haciendo crecer el sector de combustible bio. También que tomamos medidas para poder, estamos con Alberta trabajando para de este tipo de energía desde el 2021 a cero en junio 2024. 6 años adelantados del programa. Chile también está promoviendo la transición, alejándonos de los combustibles fósiles, no solamente como miembro activo del PPC, sino que también a través de una cercana colaboración con respecto a los precios del carbono, con Chile siendo uno de los primeros miembros de este desafío de carbono lanzado por Canadá a través de la colaboración dentro de los precios de carbono en la iniciativa de América. Canadá estuvo complacido de anunciar más de $7,000, $70,000 y para poder seguir con el compromiso. We celebrate the efforts that Latin America, the efforts that have been doing in terms of this matter. In Chile, we have seen a positive view in the decarbonization plan that will prioritize 2030 with a public policy agreement between the public sector, the private sector, the academia, and civil society, such as progress and the removal and reconversion of electric thermal centrals and the definition of an energy transition that is fair. Hopefully, this will be useful to improve knowledge and exchange of experiences. And so it faces, and to face together the global challenge that I presented with global change, eliminating carbon use for electric generation. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Now, representing Germany's embassy, we have Mr. Thomas Schmidt in charge of businesses.
Ministro de Energía, Diego Pardo, sus excelencias, colegas, señor Juan Carlos Olmedo, de la Coordinadora Eléctrica Nacional, muchas gracias por recibirnos y estimados participantes del día de hoy, PPCA y todos. También por mi lado, estoy muy feliz de que por mi parte Alemania va a poder hacer una contribución práctica en este evento al promover una salida del carbón más responsable, ya que la generación generada por el carbón ha sido una parte esencial de la industrialización, desarrollo económico y prosperidad en Alemania. Hasta el día de hoy, también es una parte de nuestra memoria colectiva. Incluso en mi familia, tuve 2 bisabuelos que eran mineros en el siglo XIX en una mina que se llamaba Emstorf. Y esto no está en el Valle de Ruhr, está en la parte más francesa, donde Napoleón entró en 1912 y hasta su cierre fue la mina más productiva en Alemania y las personas se sentían muy orgullosas. Pero nuestras estructuras han cambiado esencialmente en las últimas décadas. Dejamos de minar carbón hace mucho tiempo, ya no era rentable y no podía ser justificado. La mina de Enstop, volviendo a mi propia familia, ya había cerrado el año 2012. Muchos que estuvieron ahí estaban de luto, incluyendo 3 primos míos que seguían trabajando en esa mina. Pero no fue sorpresa para ellos y por las palabras del ministro, no fue un funeral de sorpresa. ¿Por qué? Porque el cambio estructural había empezado en Alemania en la década de los 60. La minería del carbón perdió su centralidad económica y otros sectores económicos emergieron. Y aquellos que trabajaron en la empresa en la industria del aprendimos cómo el cambio estructural en las regiones del carbón pueden organizarse de una manera inclusiva socialmente y de manera exitosa económicamente. Y lo más importante, tener un diálogo cercano con los sindicatos. Como dije anteriormente, la minería del carbón ya es historia en Alemania. Y el 2038 vamos a terminar completamente con este tipo de industrias que suena lejano, pero quizás podamos lograrlo antes. Los costos que van aumentando para las emisiones de CO2 y la rápida expansión de la generación de electricidad renovable puede ayudarnos en esto. Te shaping energy transition in a socially just way, and that is important. Today, we will be presented with several examples of how energy transition is being shaped in Latin America. And I'm looking forward to this. Germany was very happy to support the preparation of this event for the joint action Innovation Regions for a Just Energy Transition. This is global knowledge platform regions that are reaching out coal production and coal-based production, where we are immensely grateful that our host, Chile, is playing an active part in this global alliance. For example, also Colombia with Cesar and La Guajira region. We are also working closely with the PPCA in this platform. I am sure that this multilateral cooperation will continue to drive this phase out of coal in Latin America in the coming years, and we will also support them with our own experiences. Again, thank you very much for your attention and good luck at today's conference.
Thank you, Mrs. Schmidt. Now, a short safety notification. First of all, if there's any situation, please be calm. This building has safety measurements. You will receive instruction through the speakers. And what we need to know is that there are 2 security areas, 2 safety areas. One in front of the building, in the area where you've entered, and the other safety area is back from the casino, from the cafeteria on the other side. So keep calm, don't worry, follow the instructions. So now we will begin session number 1, the discussion session, planning for energy safety, support to removal of coal plants, and the deployment of transmission infrastructure and renewable energies. A great name. Now, we have today in the role as moderator our colleague Juan Pedro Cel, head of the Climate Change Unit and Price of Coal in the Ministry of Energy. Now, we will say goodbye to the authorities, but must be leaving. Thank you so much for participating today. Juan Pedro is with over 30 years of issues experience with climate change, including multilateral negotiations with the Framework Convention of the United Nations on Climate Change, the design and application of mitigation and adaptation policies, and the coal price sector for energy. Thank you for introducing me. Happy to moderate this panel. So thank you so much to the organizing community for thinking about this. Thank all of you for being here. And especially thank you to the panelists and the speakers that will be participating in a couple of seconds. Now, the idea of this section will be energy safety in a context of the leaving of coal plants. Let me know if I'm going too fast. For translation purposes, I will try to keep in mind this. The idea of this session is to explore several objectives. For instance, to argue common challenges in terms of energy safety, difficult, the removal of coal energies and the implementation of a network infrastructure and renewable energies, to highlight the solutions regarding planning and policies, including objectives and mandates that are national, planning of resources, pollution norms, and the price of coal, among others. Now, to present successful actions carried out by companies in public services with energy producers, developers, and the financial sector in general. And what is the political regulatory environment appropriate for this to happen in a progressive way in time? And finally, to highlight opportunities and successful collaboration examples in order to support the decarbonization of the electric sector in a context of leaving coal. So for this organization has been organized based on two presentations, which will be the opening, the beginning of the discussion, and a panel that we must introduce as we move forward in this session. We will also have a moment for questions and answers coming from the audience. And without furthermore, I leave you with the first presenter, Alex Santander, head of the division Strategic Planning, Sustainable Development from the Ministry of Energy, who will be providing an initial lecture on the Chilean process to leave and reconvert carbon centrals, coal centrals, and how the process began, the challenges for the future, together with the huge evolution we've had regarding regulatory issues, public policy. So, Alex, thank you. You have 7 minutes. This is going to be a difficult challenge, more than living. Yeah, so first of all, good morning all. So good morning once again. It's a pleasure to be here. My welcoming remarks to everybody joining us. There we go. Thank you. It's 1 minute that doesn't come to my presentation. First of all, thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here once again. PPCA has always been a great moment to talk about these issues, specifically the process of decarbonization here in Chile progresses. It has different phases, as we will see in this very brief presentation. And we are going to, in a very interesting phase, we will see it in the following slides, and let me tell you why. There we go. I will begin with the first slide that we just always love to begin with. It is basically difficult issues, interesting challenges, institutionalities that are stronger. That is something that we always wish to display. Now, this is extremely important. Will to progress, government's management, but especially the most important thing is the strength, the institutional basis with which this moves forward in a transparent way, in a responsible way. By saying this, in this slide, you will see very rapidly some schedules, some ideas of this institutionality that begins with the national energy policy that also already traces a long-term path. We have the luck in this country. We're no longer speaking about what am I going to do, what are we dreaming about doing on the long term, because we do have an agreement. Of course, every now and then we think about it, but the focus of the discussion is how to move forward with a strong focus, with concrete steps in the short and medium term in order to be coherent with that long term that we're dreaming about, that we have agreed upon, and that we have established somehow. Now, some main goals we have for that long term: having a 100% electric system that is free of greenhouse gas emissions. We don't get lost on that. That is the goal of 2050 today. And to achieve an intermediate goal for 2030, 80% at least for renewable energies. And that requires a lot of effort, infrastructure, but especially new infrastructure. Hopefully will stop being new soon, but that is related to energy storage. We know that storage in this decade, or what's left of this decade, it's key, and we have a goal, which is something that we are promoting strongly from institutionality, which is to achieve at least 2 gigawatts of capacity in energy storage, specifically the storage of 4 to 5 hours approx regarding energy. All of this is sectorial aspiration. In this slide, I'm going to be 5 minutes at least. I'm just kidding. But the other aspiration is the environmental climate aspiration that connects. And in that, not long ago, in 2022, we promoted the climate change framework law that establishes a very clear legal goal, which is neutral carbon country resilient before 2050. We support this with different tools, different strategies that specifically specify how to move forward in the midterm goals. And today, we're working on how to move forward in the short-term goals. I will show you in another slide that is coming. But specifically, let's keep this in mind. The main goal, a country 100% free of greenhouse gas emissions with different technologies. We don't know yet, but we need to get to this. And it promotes carbon neutrality and to be a resilient country with a name, with a goal that opposes to all the effects of climate change. I can go to the next one, I'm just kidding. So this is, I'm going to go fast on this, but it's just to get that we didn't get here immediately. It requires institutionality in the sectorial area, sector institutional framework that is the milestone. What was the publication of our energy policy, the first sectorial policy, the state vision in 2015 that would factorize in 2022 with another administration, but keeping a big part of the essence on the same policy that is always very good to mention. And together with that, with the institutionality of public policies, we have legal progress, some advances. I will keep them there. Maybe you will like to see the presentation afterwards, but we have many milestones that have impacted the decision making, especially milestones regarding drafts, gas crisis, drafts, once again, draft, because it's a permanent draft. But finally, a positive thing was the cutback of renewable energy. When you make a decision, when you make an important decision, it was the milestone of the energy policy to migrate towards clean energy and to cut back our energy dependency from abroad. As you know, in Chile, 90% approx of all of our energy use comes from fuel that we import from different parts of the world. Okay, now the thing that I need to say, the process of coal removal. This started in 2018 by the ends of a government where they established an agreement. The agreement is we won't build more coal, no more coal. That was the first voluntary agreement with which we begin this discussion, quite connected to what was mentioned of the PPCA. It is a great moment to mention this, by the way. And on that date, at the beginning of a new administration that grasps this commitment and translates it into a work table, where if we're speaking about different aspects, thinking about air quality, health, international experience, impacts in the electric system, environmental effects, technological alternatives, social and economical impact, all of that documented, all of that has been useful in order to provide us a light on how to concrete this process, which finishes with something very interesting, which is the voluntary agreement in which we established that by 2014 we will have a stop of coal centrals as such, together with the neutrality coal goal. That is so wonderful because we subscribed internationally that in COP25 with the country. And finally, that was translated in materializes of the climate change framework law as a law. And that begins with an agreement of 8 generating units with dates of the closing date very well established. 8 out of 28. In 2018, it was 28 coal generating units. Some work more than others, it was mentioned before, but today we can say that at least 25 have scheduled their path, their way to go. Some must be more accurate than others in some aspects, but we already have a huge percentage of plants, mainly, that have specified their path. Reconversion, subject to financial revision, of course, the removal, or at some point, they haven't said it, but we know that they are doing an analysis in order to subscribe something. In concrete terms, I don't want to spend that much time on this. This will be available, but we have 11 units that have been removed so far. Out of the 28, we have 4 that have already announced their removal, specific removal before 2025, and other 5 that have announced possible reconversion. And a total of 3 that haven't provided any signs, specific signs about the future, and some others, such as Wacolda, that have shown evidence of a reconversion with a clean fuel technology. This is a reality. This has been happening in Chile. The others are agreements, but this is generation when thinking about dispatch. It doesn't look that cool, but in black we have coal generation we've had since 1996 to 2024, thinking about the year. In green, this is renewable energy, including hydroelectricity, which is free of CO2, basically, in the same period of time. And in the bottom, maybe in the screen looks better, but we don't really see the color here. But in gray, we have diesel generation, and in this other color that I think it was black brown or something like that, we have natural gas generation. So as you can see, we had a stress in coal generation in 2017 here. But today, we go from generation back then to 44, 40%, something like that. And now 17%, so we have moved forward quite a lot. As we receive more renewable generation in this chart, you can see how coal generation behaves versus variable renewable generation, which is wind, solar in blue. And here we have a very important milestone in 2022 when wind plus PV, photovoltaic, connected, surpassed for the first time in the history of generation to coal generation. So that has happened, and this is the future. It doesn't look that nice, but sorry, maybe we lose focus, but I will try to show you. Imagine the presentation, but here what we had was a curve. Okay, we're thinking about a curve. Coal installed capacity. It started here, it's coming here. Follow me on this, bear with me, and here. This is the capacity with almost 5.5 gigawatts of coal, and it goes to 2040 to zero. That is the commitment. And today we are in this point. This is the point where this year we're going to have 36% reduction of coal capacity compared to what we had in 2018. But next year, we will have availability, be able to remove the plants up to 70%. Now comes the good part, technical challenge. And I think that this is a great panel in order to discuss that topic. Going from 0 to 10 to 20, it's challenging, of course it is. But going from 30, this is the situation today, to 70, it's more than challenging. So, in that sense, what we're doing in the framework, it was mentioned by the Minister in the decarbonization plan, it is to define those specific enabling actions with which we need to emphasize, that we need to emphasize in order for this curve to happen in the fastest possible way, understanding that it's not free to be able to carry out this curve as such, free from the challenge point of view. Yeah. So that is what we wanted to put on the table. And emphasizing also in institutionality. Today, we are updating a regulatory body which is key for the reduction of, it is the emission norm for thermoelectrical plants, a Supreme Decree number 13, in which we've had a very interesting work, I would say. Always can be perfect, can be better, but to understand the challenge in a common way between the energy sector and the environment sector, we have gotten to a very nice, interesting agreement that have ruled and set as a basis the discussion regarding this tool that is being updated today that will put some emission limits that are stronger or will allow less emissions, of course, in local pollutants, but with a focus in a gradual adaptation that allows for technologies of reaching or replacement to get to that point, recognizing and promoting reconversion, because we don't want for this to get closed, right? We are promoting reconversion as such. That is the challenge, especially because of the local development, employment, flexible operations, that trade-off we have between decreasing local pollutants, basically particulated materials, sulfide acid, NOx, and also be able to reduce CO2, global pollutants. Oh, I can go to technical, but as we put more environmental restriction, the operation of the thermoelectrical plants gets more rigid. Therefore, the placing of renewable sources gets more complex. So that trade-off we're looking for, of course, is part of the discussion. It is what has been coming from this tool, and of course, align with the decree that is subscribed, in which we established that all owners of coal plants will stop operating with coal as it has been known in 2040. That is also part of the discussion. So once again, institutionality and this emissions norm will be key for that. And I think this is the last one. Oh, almost, almost. Challenges, operational challenges. It's just to give you a little bit of a focus. Today, we have electric Chilean systems that are quite renewable, with many renewables, but from the safety point of view, is very connected to rotational plants with synchronic machinery, especially represented by thermal units and hydro units. We're looking a progressive increase of generation that brings some digital science, all types of technologies. They're going to be very interesting. They're going to be very vital in the future electric system. But this is a progressive thing. We need to accelerate as fast as possible. But that is what we have. 2030, the removal of coal retirement is moving forward. It's going to be 80%, as we saw in the chart that I tried to ask you to imagine. And in 2030 will be available for the removal. So many less synchronic machinery in the country. It was also mentioned by the electric coordinator. There was a bidding. They will be supporting this type of safety progression to the network. We need to continue with that line because safety is key in order to enable the retirement of coal. And we will make traditional solutions. They will somehow facilitate these retirement, synchronous, the reconversion of the central with solutions that are more innovative. We also need to give them room to generate the regulatory incentives. So this is actually a nice business and a rapid incorporation of hopefully IBR devices or based resources based on this power, and also GETS, which is this electric network devices. For 2015, a different conversation. We will get to our challenges and political challenges and goals of having an electric system that is 100% free of emissions, which has been stipulated in our energy policy. As a key message, energy transition, of course, needs to take into account different technologies. Focus, and with this, I give the floor to the panel. It's not that we don't like to speak about the long term, but we've spoken about it a lot. So the focus is the midterm, today. We need to do this. Cool. We didn't manage for this to become a reality. We know where we want to go. What we're doing today is building how to get to that point with things that are concrete. And this follows this last slide, certainty, but deep down, what we're doing today, right now, it is to build public policy tools that complement those political strategic tools that we already have progressed on. A policy, the update, will continue to update whenever necessary. It's updated every 5 years, but what we're doing today is the construction of three main plans. Two of them have seen the light. The green hydrogen plan, that is to promote an industry that also presents virtuous things in this technological exchange, but many challenges. That's why an action plan is necessary. The adaptation and mitigation plan to climate change. This is not something we do by pleasure. We like to do this, but it is a mandate from the law on climate change, and it is a public consultation process. So I give you the link to please help us to disseminate and and have many people that can truly review this in a critical way and to communicate their comments before October the 25th. We are going to launch this decarbonization plan. The minister said it better than me. What he wants is to establish the enabling conditions, regulatory conditions, technological conditions, social work conditions that allow somehow, among other, to take us where we want to go in terms of decarbonization, specifically thought about the removal and reconversion of power plants, coal power plants, in our electric matrix. That's it. I think I extended my time, sorry, but thank you for paying attention.
Thank you, Ale, so much. I think you stole 4 minutes to the next speaker. No, thank you so much. Especially when it comes to regulatory and technological challenges to try and live without coal in our electrical grid. Now I'm going to leave the floor to our second speaker, who is Melardo Canedas, Study Director's Information Projects from OLADE, who is also sharing a presentation about policies in the region, addressing the status of this transition and the necessary investments to replace coal, and also common barriers that countries in the region may experience. Welcome, and it's a great pleasure seeing you again. We saw each other last year, I think. It says 10 minutes, but okay. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I am no longer Director of Studies in OLADE. I ended up my functions very recently. I am now an advisor to the General Secretary, and probably the director will say this. I'm going to take the most of my 3 minutes. Starting with this slide. We love this slide because it might not be too friendly, but this is an X-ray of the region. On the left side, you can see the information of where energy is coming from, what Latin America and the Caribbean is consuming. And it's evident our main source of energy is still being oil with 33%, followed by natural gas, and coal only represents 4%. Hydro has a strong presence of 9%, and something that's very interesting is the presence of firewood. Firewood is an important feature in the region, and Chile lives this reality. And another important piece of information that I think is interesting in this slide, as we go along the energy path to the right, which is the transformation process, we reach energy production that's electrical. And where does electrical energy come from? Natural gas, some oil, hydro, very, very strongly, coal, and electricity only represents 19% of the final consumption of energy. This is something that's very interesting for us. On the consumption side, I'm not going to go into further detail, but I want to go to the next slide, how we are doing in the global context. In the right cake, we have the same information than in the previous slide, but on the left, we have its comparison with the global context. And what can we see here? That the great difference when it comes to energy in the region with the global context lies in the participation of renewables and the participation of coal. As we use coal as a 4% as a primary energy, on a global level, coal represents 27%. And this sets an important difference. And when it comes to renewables, if we include firewood, because it is renewable, it's pollution, but it is renewable, we have a participation of a 31% of renewables against a global participation of 14%. This figure is very exciting for us. And through these presentations, we can say that we are the greenest region in the planet. Personally, I don't like to say that very much because it's the false sensation of a task completed. But in reality, we still have a long way to go. Here we have the installed capacity when it comes to electricity. Let's remember that electricity is only 19%, and we see what has happened since 2010. In 2010, we saw an installed capacity of 300 gigawatts. In the last piece of information, in 2022, we have 500. This means that we've grown on a 67%. But you can see what is the starting point. The energy history of electricity in the region is a hydro and thermal reality. We can see that here, and that hasn't changed in the current days. And the 200 gigawatts that represents the growth, only 100 has been absorbed by renewables, wind, biomass, and solar. So the historical behavior is kept. And when it comes to thermal generation, that represents 37% of the installed capacity, coal only represents 3.2%. In absolute values, the installed capacity in coal in the region is only 16 gigawatts. Where is this installed capacity? Mainly, we can see the numbers at the bottom of the screen. Mexico has an installed capacity of over 5. Then we have Chile, Brazil, Colombia, and Dominican Republic. Between those 5 countries, we have 95% of coal capacity in the region. That's where we need to focus on. There's also coal generation in Guatemala and Panama, in other countries from Central America, but in capacity it's very small. Now, the world context. The ambassador said something related to this, related to the capacity, and these are the numbers. In the last year, the installed capacity of coal has grown, and it's very interesting because this means that in only 1 year, the generation capacity, coal-based worldwide, grew 3 times the installed capacity that we want to eliminate. So this is a piece of information that is very interesting, or should be. Another interesting thing is that the retirements are progressing and are increasing, but retirements in the last year has been even less than previous years. And another interesting thing is that China is the one that incorporates coal capacities, but there are other countries that are incorporating 4.7 gigawatts. So the issue of growth of installed capacity when it comes to coal is not just about China, but rather there are other countries that are still incorporating new capacities that are coal-based, and that is the Latin American reality. We see a clear trend. First, on the top, we see projects that are being abandoned. This means those that have contracts that are no longer executed. There's a progressive regression, and the installed capacity is being kept, and there's not a decrease despite the fact that retirements are increasing. But for now, we've identified that we have 1.4 gigawatts in projects that are still under construction. 2 identified in Brazil and 1 in Argentina. In the rest of the countries, what are we seeing? With the only exception of Chile, the organizers asked me not to talk about Chile because there's a lot of people that are going to address Chile, but only the exception of Chile, what we are looking in the rest of the countries is good intentions, and the message is clear, just good intentions. What are the barriers that we are identifying in general in countries that are facing this challenge? First, there are coal centrals that have increased in operations in the recent years, so we have assets that have not been amortized. So what solutions can we see to those investments that we are asking to be retired? Of course, one of those alternatives is reconversion. There's one other slide that addresses what it means, reconversion challenges. We've identified that there are certain countries that in individual cases have extended its incentives for coal use. The kinds of subsidies to coal has been extended throughout time, in the case of Colombia, in the case of Mexico. And this is definitely a barrier that we need to overcome. Economic and social problems. There are social realities that are very connected to the coal industry that we cannot turn our blind eye to. And this is a challenge that we cannot ignore. We need to consider so that the progress of this journey that we're going through can actually be a sustainable progress. And the last issue is regulations. Regulatory limitations that are restricting a more accelerated development in this issue, because if we are looking for an alternative to coal, this alternative has to be renewable, including hydro, because the energy reality of Latin America and the Caribbean is very connected to hydro, and the new technological alternatives like pumping centrals with a storage mechanism. It's important for us to unlock those obstacles that regulation, by either omission or by action, are motivating and stopping a better development of renewable energies. Now, reconversion. Something was said about this before. What alternatives are those investors and encouragers are looking for that invested in coal plants? As alternatives, we have biomass, natural gas, and ammonia. Each one has its own problems. Biomass, its biggest limitation is the territory that is needed to replace coal for biomass, or the biomass that we need to impact and depend on and change economies and the flow of capitals outside. So we had to create currencies to bring in an energy source that can replace something that we have locally, which doesn't necessarily is as simple to manage. Secondly, natural gas. It is an option, but for those who have it. Otherwise, we are facing the problem of transport. We're talking about variation of cost in the international market. And of course, natural gas is the fuel that has less pollution, but it has pollution either way. And ammonia is cost. And a cost analysis has determined that it's even more convenient from an economical point of view to opt for renewables before an ammonia reconversion. So reconversion has its own problems and limitations. Now, on what kind of opportunities can we see in the electrical system? Electrical systems, and I think that these latest slides in the Chilean case show that the natural replacement of coal has to do with more penetration with renewables, but renewables need to go hand in hand necessarily by storage systems. And I think that investments in renewables, especially in Chile, justify these kinds of measures. And other operational conditions that are also required that the national coordinator is going to present is that the combination between renewables and storage has indicated that there are operational alternatives that were not connected to renewables, especially in frequency regulation. So we have alternatives that by combining renewables, intermittence, and storage, we do see technological alternatives that are very helpful in the operation of the systems. Now, when it comes to avoiding spillings, Chile knows a lot about this problem. And here we can see a situation that's very particular. When we talk about energy transition, I think that the first transition, or how it was assimilated in the first place, was a transition focused exclusively to generation. And it was left on the side the rest of the value chain. We forget about transmission and distribution. And the reality today is that we are seeing that a sustainable development from the energy sector and a sustainable energy transition is a transition that needs to involve the entire value chain. And finally, the adaptability of the decommissioning plans with the energy realities of each country. And this is very important because on the margin of the decarbonization objectives and emission reduction, there is a fundamental objective in countries, and especially it is responsibility of operators, and that is to guarantee the supply. And what we've seen in the region is that droughts for longer periods than the historical data can provide have forced, not because of pleasure but because of need, to turn to thermal generation because there's a reduction of generation from hydro. So these processes have to walk towards middle and long goals, but they need to be flexible enough to know that the priority, number one priority, is to ensure the supply. And if this number one priority forces us to move or momentaneously distract us from the plans, we need to do so because the number one priority is to guarantee the supply. I have two success cases. Brazil is a big issue, right? Because what have they offered to this panel? A law that they passed on 2022 that prepares the road for decarbonization of the Santa Catarina state, which is the coal state by excellence. Why am I sharing this experience? Because this law incorporates, besides decommissionings, three fundamental aspects. First, to ensure that more environmental liabilities are created, then the environment of the region, and then mobilizing resources for the reposition of the region and the population in other economic activities. And I think this is a great example because it faces one of the biggest limitations, which are social and economic. And the other example is Colombia. Colombia, I think, is the most recent partner of this initiative, of this alliance, since last year, I think, and there's a very strong will of this government. They have a bill of law that is not easy to discuss in Congress to limitate or ban the development of new projects of coal exploitation. There are problems in the development of this law proposed by the government, but it shows a political will of moving towards this path. This is why I'm sharing this. And other countries that, as an alternative measure, are generating or creating laws and regulations that encourage the development of renewables. And I had to include the case of Chile, but I'm not going to delve deeper into this because there are people that know this reality a lot better and then can present it in a better way. Thank you. Thank you so much. These are excellent examples of the region, and without further more, we're now going to start the panel. I would now like to start each panelist to take their seats. Maria Jose Cabello, senior analyst, and they are going to talk about Net Zero World, and that's an initiative that a lot of countries are part of. So Maria Jose, wherever you want. Rodrigo Espinosa, Operations Manager of the National Electric Coordinator. Rodrigo, please. Thank you. Jorge Gutierrez Garcia, Senior Executive of Cata Carbon Trust. I don't know if Francisco Barros is here. You made it, Francisco. That's great. Chief of Development for NG. And also Alex Santander and Medardo, of course, to be a part of the panel. I'm going to address the panel from here. Otherwise, my chair is going to be at the bottom. Thank you so much. Thank you to the panel. I'm going to start. We have a great challenge because at 11 we need to have our recess. So hopefully let's keep our answers short and brief so that we can have time so that the audience can also ask their questions. I'm going to start with a question that has to do with financing. And I'm going to ask Jorge Gutierrez from CATA. What are the typical challenges in order to ensure financing for the anticipated decommissioning of coal plants in Latin America and the Caribbean? Thank you so much. Thank you for this invitation. I'll try to keep my answer under 2 minutes. I think that's the greatest challenge that we have for the panel. What I want to say is that this is a very relevant question because this is the last link closing this circle for the anticipated decommissioning of coal assets. Why? Because ultimately, we have our technical analysis, we have our economic analysis of just transitions, public policies. How can we manage this for this to happen? And the key aspect here that we have is financing. And this is one of the main issues that we need to consider when we are planning around this. In this way, what I want to mention very quickly is that there are social, economical, financing, environmental challenges, and public policies. And I'm going to focus my answer in the financing part. And this has to do with three aspects that financing considers. One is the amount, then risk, and the third one has to do with a time horizon. Naturally, what we do is how to mitigate this risk. I think that the central question is how to respond to this. How can we mitigate the risk through public policies, and how we can have enough incentives, etc. And I'm going to focus in that. Because when it comes to the amount, we need to know that transition requires meaningful investments. It requires dismantling costs that are very high of abandoned assets and the investment of substitution as well. That's the main factor in renewables. The second aspect that has to do with risk, and this is very important because ultimately the owners of these assets, either the government or privates, they can perceive this investment as a risk, as a loss. So what should we think? We should develop compensation mechanisms that are fair. And this is very important for us to mitigate this risk. And a time horizon. We need to ensure to have enough time for the recovery of this investment. And what I want to mention, many have said something about this, and this is regulatory barriers that have to be aligned with the climate goals for each country, environmental issues, social issues as well. This is a very important point. It's a social disruption, so we need to ensure a smooth transition for who? For workers. And another quick aspect that I want to mention is market structures. In the region, we have structures that are very liberal, and we have very controlled by the states. We have incentives and disincentives. And as a conclusion, I would like to say that what we need ultimately is government leadership that is robust. We also need clear regulation that provides certainties. Also, we need to have an open and transparent process that allows the discussion for every stakeholder. And I think those are the key elements. And that the finance instruments need to be innovator. We need to think beyond conventional instruments so that we can accelerate this transition. I think that's all for me. Thank you. Thank you, Jorge. Now I'm going to give the floor to Maria Jose Garcia on the side of initiatives or emerging solutions and perspectives that we can see in this topic. Maria Jose, what are some of the best practices for energy planification in general in the Chilean process, and how is this collaborating the Net Zero World Initiative with the governments? In 2 minutes. Thank you, Juan Pedro. As Juan Pedro said, in representation of Net Zero World and as a counterpart of the Ministry of Energy, first of all, I want to explain that Net Zero World is an initiative that was announced by the United States in order to ensure global decarbonization. This is a focus that groups 9 government agencies and the 10 specialized laboratories from the United States Energy Department. And what it aims at is to provide technical support, accelerate and mobilize investments, and to articulate transforming actions towards decarbonization with the objective of reaching an unprecedented level with partner countries: Chile, Argentina, Ukraine, Indonesia, Egypt, Vietnam, Singapore, India, South Africa, and Thailand. Chile was one of the first countries to join the initiative, so we've been working with them for a long time. So in this way, I want to mention 2 initiatives that are related to what we are talking about, and we are working with them. And one of them has to do with accelerating just transitions on a community level. How we're working with this? We are working in ensuring Tocopilla and Antofagasta cities with Lawrence in Kansas, United States, and what we're working there in economic development, education, health, and environment. And the other thing about them in these sister cities is the implementation of a pilot program in Tocopilla that reutilizes photovoltaic panels and studies the replicability of this pilot in other Chilean communities that are under this transition process. And the other initiative that I want to comment that has to do with today's discussion is progressing in the modernization of the electrical grid and decarbonization of the electrical system. This is an initiative that we've been working with the electrical coordinator and the National Energy Commission, and what it wants is something that we were seeing in the presentations, and which is reducing spillings, increasing the capacity of existing lines, and reducing the cost of congestion. This is very important because Alex was also saying this. We are not looking to 2050. We are looking for the short and middle term issues. So when it comes to incorporating renewable energies that are replacing carbon plants that are being decommissioned. So very concretely, is the development of a regulatory framework that allows for the successful application of pilots in the electrical Chilean grid, especially transmission systems in Chile, in order to create and implement a set of incentives so that asset owners of the electrical system can adopt these new technologies. And the other thing is to determine auxiliary services that are necessary to maintain the reliability of the electrical system, with a high penetration system of renewable energies and large amounts of resources that are investment based. That's all basically. And as a third aspect in this, they are supporting us in finishing the national decarbonization plan that many of you here have worked on with us. And in order not to focus a lot in Chile, I want to quickly mention that with Argentina, we are working in the support of capturing and supporting and storage and widening the capacity of the grids to allow high penetration of low emission energies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now changing panelists, when thinking about the company, ENGIE, Francisco, how has ENGIE implemented coal transition, successful removal examples of energy plants, repotentiations, and I will add a fair transition. There was some news on the paper, very interesting, of what they were doing in that topic also.
Sí,
If you
a
can
ver,
do so
como
in 2 minutes,
es
yes.
un plan de
To see
cinco
how to
años
summarize a
en dos
5 years
minutos.
plan in 2 minutes.
Pero, a ver,
Well,
en concreto, la
in
empresa,
concrete
bueno,
terms,
aquí
the company
alineada con
NG also
las
aligned with
directrices que ha tenido
the
también la
guidelines
matriz
that the
en
majors has
Francia,
had in France,
ha tomado este
has
acuerdo voluntario
taken
que
this
Alex ya
voluntary
mencionó
agreement that
de
Alex
estar,
mentioned of
¿cómo se
being
llama? Planificar bien
a
el retiro de estas
plan the
unidades
retirement of these units
y
in
en
a proper
concreto,
way
o el
and in
plan que tenemos hoy
concrete.
día
And the plan we
como
have today
compañía es que
as a
a diciembre
company
de
is that in
2025
December
podamos estar
2025
ya
we can be
fuera de
out
operación con
of
carbón.
operations with coal.
Pero
But
lo que hay detrás no es solamente
what's behind is
desconectar
not
o
just
convertir
to
unidades,
disconnect or to
para
convert
nosotros han sido tres
units.
pilares de
To
trabajo
us, these have been
bastante
three
claves.
work
El
pillars
primero de
that have
ellos,
been key. The
creo que el más
first one,
importante, ha sido
and the
el
most important one,
mencionado de la
it was
transición
mentioned
justa,
about fair,
porque nosotros
just
tenemos dos sitios
transition, because we have two
principalmente donde
sites
está la obra.
mainly,
Estaba en
where we
Tocopilla,
had
Operación
in
de Carbón,
Tocopilla
y hoy día permanece
this
en la parte de
operation, and
Mejillones, en
today
el
is in
norte
Mejillones
de
in the
Chile.
north of Chile.
Y en Tocopilla
And in
iniciamos mucho
Tocopilla, we
antes
started
este
much
proceso,
before this
y una de las
processor.
aristas más
And one of
complejas,
the most
difíciles,
complex and
fue
difficult
obviamente trabajar
areas
con
was working
sindicatos,
with the
trabajar
unions,
con
working
las
with
personas
the
que veían
people
obviamente que podía verse
that
afectado su
might
continuidad
be
de trabajo,
impacted in
más
terms of work
también lo que
continuity, and
significaba que la
also
comunidad
for the
quedara
community to be left
con esta
with this
déficit de
deficit
fuentes de trabajo.
of work
Ese
sources.
fue como el
That
principal
was the
desafío.
main challenge, I
Creo que la
think.
estrategia
I
fue
think that the
algo
strategy
importante
was
de
something
iniciarlo
key
muy
to
temprano este
begin very
proceso,
early
trabajar de
this
manera
process, working
transparente,
in a
armar
transparent
también
way,
planes de
to
capacitación,
assemble
y hoy día
training programs.
logramos
And today
reubicar muchas
we
de
have
esas
managed
personas
to
en
relocate
distintas
many
otras
of those people in
operaciones,
many different
pero
operations.
particularmente y
But
partiendo con
specifically, and
Tocopilla
starting
como
with the
caso
Tocopilla, as
quiero
in the
decir, de
case of
éxito,
a
porque ya en
success case, because in
2022 la
2022
compañía
the
dejó de
company
operar
stopped
con carbón,
operating
las
with
últimas
coal.
unidades se
The
desconectaron a
last
finales del
units were
2022,
disconnected by the end of
pero
2022, but
en la visión de
in the
solamente,
vision of
obviamente, de
just
mantener puestos de trabajo,
keeping
pero también ver
workplaces, but
procesos de
also
conversión,
checking
hoy
reconversion
día en
processes.
el caso de
Today,
Tocopilla,
in Tocopilla's case,
alineado con lo que
aligned with what
ya mencionaron de esta
was
licitación
mentioned
de
already on the
condensadores
tendering
síncronos,
on synchronous
logramos
condensators, we have
participar
managed to
y
participate and
adjudicar
to
una conversión, es decir, una
allocate
de
a
nuestras unidades
reconversion.
en
Our
Tocopilla,
units in
la unidad
Tocopilla,
15,
Unit
si
15,
va a estar presente
if it
proveyendo
will
este
be
servicio.
present
De
providing
hecho,
this service.
fue la única
Actually, it
conversión
was
que
the
pudo
only reconversion
adjudicar.
that was
Y eso
able to
obviamente no
happen. And
significa,
this
obvio,
doesn't mean
hay un
to,
negocio,
I
hay
mean,
un
there's
caso de negocio
a
detrás, pero
business case
también hay
behind it,
trabajo
but there
detrás
is
de
also work
personas que van a
behind it
seguir,
of
obviamente,
people that will
operando en ese
continue to
sentido, y
operate
eso
in
es
that
algo
sense, and that
positivo.
is a positive
Y
thing.
adicionalmente, uno de los
Additional to
proyectos
that,
como
one
más
of the projects that is more
emblemáticos para nosotros ha
emblematic
sido
to
el
us
tema
has
del
been the
almacenamiento,
issue of storage.
Tocopilla, donde antes
Tocopilla,
estaban las
where we
unidades
used to
de
have the
carbón,
units
hoy
for
día va a
coal,
estar en
now
parte
we will
270
have with
contenedores
over 270
de
containers
almacenamiento
of
eléctrico con
electric
BES,
storage with BESS,
116 megas aproximadamente por
116
5 horas. Entonces,
per
hay un
5 hours
trabajo
a
detrás
month.
de
So there's a
personas,
lot of work of
proyectos en ese
people,
sentido.
project in that
Y
sense.
ahora lo que estamos
And today,
enfrentando,
what
y
we're
estamos
facing,
un paso
we are
concreto,
near
es el
with
2025, qué pasa con
concrete steps in
Mejillones, y a
2025. What happens with
Mejillones tiene
Mejillones? With
todo un
Mejillones
proceso de
has entered
conversión.
a
La
reconversion
unidad más
process.
nueva que
The
tenemos de
newest unit
carbón
we
a
have
gas,
for gas
eso ya
coal that is
está en pro
already
de ser ejecutado y
about to be
terminado
executed
a mediados del 2026.
in
Y
midst
la
of
pregunta que viene
2026.
ahora es
So the
qué
question is,
alternativas de
what are
conversión
the
nos
conversion
quedan con
alternatives
las otras unidades que
remaining
también se
with
van a
the
desconectar
following
en
units that will
2025, al
get
menos según
disconnected
este
in
periodo,
2025
a la espera
CTM1,
de cuál va a ser
CTM2,
la definición
waiting
también
for
de la
the
autoridad andina,
definition
otras
of
unidades que
the
tenemos de andina,
authorities on the
que
other
se
units we
hacen
have in
en
Andinas,
Hornitos.
Andinas
Entonces, hay un
Hornitos.
trabajo
So there's a
muy
work,
grande de
a lot of
conversión,
work
de
of
financiamiento de
reconversion,
estas
financing of
iniciativas,
these
pero
initiatives,
muy detrás
but
también de personas.
together
Y el
connected to
último punto para
people.
cerrar
The
es
last
que hay
part,
una
just to finish
inversión
it,
muy
there is
grande
a
también de
huge
la compañía
investment
en
from the
renovables, ha
company in
crecido
renewables,
mucho
a
la cantidad de
huge
energía
growth
solar y
of
eólica y
solar
sobre
and wind
todo el
energy,
almacenamiento.
especially storage.
Creemos que a
We
2025,
believe
si
that in
todos los proyectos llegan en
2025, if all
forma, vamos a estar
projects are
con cerca
okay,
de 2
we will
gigawatt
be
hora de
near 2
capacidad de
gigawatts
almacenamiento
hour of
instalada,
installed storage
370
capacity,
megas de
370
de
megas in
capacidad.
terms of
Entonces, ese ha
capacity.
sido el contexto
That
de
is the
descarbonización
context on
que ha empujado Engie,
decarbonization
pero
promoted
siempre
by
como
Engie,
pilar
but
el
always
concepto
as a
de
pillar the
transición
concept
justa.
of just fair transition. Thank you. Now we go to the electric coordinator regarding question. How should the system operate in a different way? Different to, I mean, large centralized coal plants to integrate renewable energies. The other one is how to keep reliability of the network. Good morning. Thank you, Pedro, for the question. And also thank you for the invitation to the organizing people to share the panel, to share the experience. It's not an easy question. There are many ways of answering. And I would like to focus on two aspects. The first one is related to an issue that it's related to me. I'm the operations manager. Therefore, on a daily basis, we have to deal with a situation that in our system is really specific. In the rest of the world, very common because everybody, the sun hides at a certain time in the day, but in Chile specifically, you have a huge support that is stable in solar energy in the north area. When the sun goes down, it's an operational challenge regarding how to replace that huge amount of energy with the available park. There's generation in terms of inverters, wind, hydro, thermal. What's required out of that park is flexibility, necessary flexibility in order to respond to the growing ramp up of net demand that has achieved so far 50% till now of the total demand on the system. That is a huge challenge that requires the support of all technologies, specifically thermal plants that have done a huge effort. There's even some plants that are in the process of their retirement. They have already done some adjustments in their operation in order to guarantee lower technical requirements and so specify the situation. Now, the other aspect that I think is key, perhaps a bit more long term, and it's related to the fact that the retirement of conventional plants, specifically the ones related to coal, also relates to inherent features to synchronous technology. I'm talking about not just inertia, but short circuit. Perhaps the good news is that today we already have assigned, allocated a bidding to install synchronous condensators in the north area that will allow us, for instance, to get to, at some point of the day, to operate the system with 100% renewable generation, including hydro. The nearest we've been on on that goal is in January this year. 95% of the generation on the national electric system was supplied with hydraulic, solar, and wind generation. And those synchronous condensators that will get installed in 2027 will probably allow to get to that 100%. Thank you so much. Since we have Ale, there were some questions that were not in the script, but very briefly. Alex, if you can mention perhaps the role that the retirement of coal plants have had and planning on this retirement in the scenarios of previous and update. What is the influence? What is the impact? It is highly related because the removal of coal is one of the main measurements regarding the reduction of emissions on our current situation, if not the main one. But clearly, the challenges that come in the future, and I just want to put the patch before the injury, as we say here. I want to know about the situation. The issues related to tariff have put in place that the challenge of our sector is not just decarbonization as such. It is extremely important, of course, if not the most important thing. But our sector is also key in the national economy. Intermediate consumption by excellency in the national economy, therefore key as competitiveness for the country. So, having those two things in the table, I would say we have different levels of conversation when thinking about the horizon we keep in mind. NSC was built based in a work neutrality carbon we did, a work we did, many of us in the room, in 2019, considering the long-term vision and stability of the system in the long term as such. And so the solutions were obvious. No more coal, much renewable. Let's go with that renovation, solar concentration in the power that was quite close in this decade even. But the progress has said that we need to balance things in different ways as we get near time scales that are near on the short term. And that the institutionality has taken us to that conversation because we started with carbon neutrality We worked with the environment and the environment strategy, a mid-long-term vision. But today we are doing climate change sectorial plans with a 5 years term. And you think 5 years for this sector? It's nothing. That is tomorrow in real life. And in that sense, we've had to put on the table and in our minds different transitory solutions that we didn't visualize back then, the use of renewable fuels, thermoelectrical reconversion as a possibility to cut back emissions, maybe not zero, but as much as we can. And I believe that that is a conversation that it's a bit more rough because it goes directly to, it's more short-term interest related. And that is what we have tried to institutionalize through what we determined as the decarbonization plan that we were even in that session here speaking about it. So that has shortened the energy planning of the models that are a support for the decision-making process of a reality that is a bit more rough on the short term, but that must not lose focus in any case to be incoherent with the long-term goals. So that is on the short term. And that is what I want to specify and say that here, tools are the ones that will avoid for us to have fights and struggles on technological tastes and so on. That's why I put my focus on this technological progress. Eduardo, the role of Olave, what do you think about Olave's role in this whole process of transition and retirement of coal? Even though some countries have a very small consumption, well, what is teaching us in everything that's happening in the region and globally? The only certainty we have is that there are no certainties. We are building a path, we are learning, we are experimenting. And the best way of facing this is with cooperation and collaboration. The fact of looking at what the neighbor is doing, the good thing, the bad thing, what are the measurements, this can be replicable or not for my reality and local realities of the country. I believe that that is the best moment for a regional organism such as OLADE to intervene and put all of their potential at the service of the region and the member countries in order to generate those dialogue spaces to share experiences and especially look for external support for those problems that we need to solve internally in the region. Amazing, thank you. Very briefly, and then I will go to the audience for anybody in the panel. What is the type of action supports useful to plan effectively? Integrated plan for resources for the transition. Whoever wishes to share. Let's go to the next one then. I think that that might be a bit more interesting in terms of the role of different institutions. Yes, yes, please go ahead. Just 2 seconds. You mentioned a word. It's something that excites us, the issue of planning. What are we looking at? Within this context of collaboration, the recent experience says that, for instance, countries that had to face serious drought conditions, the reduction of flows in the generation, the degrees of hydroelectric generation were able to surpass and avoid reacting conditions thanks to the interconnections they had with neighboring countries. And so we go to an area of regional integration. How to connect regional integration with planning? What are we looking at? We've said much about integration. We take so many pictures, many integration events, but we are not planning integration schemes. Each country continues to plan as an individual reality. So that quantitative leap towards truly integrated planning by making a regional use of all the resources, I believe it's a goal. And it's an effort that we are seriously committed to. Thank you. Please. An interesting thing that Alex mentioned this also, but it is extremely important to mention. For instance, the law of emissions. We might think that this is a work from the ministry and the authorities that are connected not only to energy, but it is extremely important. If we're doing transition planning, we need to get involved all the key players government players.
Parte
I'm
ambiental,
thinking about
todo lo que hemos estado viendo, y
environmental
esto
issues
ha
related to
sido
permits.
clave, por
This has
ejemplo,
been
en el
key,
desarrollo de
for instance, in the
almacenamiento, donde
development
se
of the
nota
storage, where we
una
can see a
consistencia, no solamente de lo
consistency,
que
not
el
only
Ministerio de
related
Energía
to
está
what the
estableciendo,
energy
sino que luego con los
Ministry of Energy
ministerios,
is establishing,
cómo
but
se
the
enlaza
different
con el
ministries on how to
desarrollo.
connect on that
Entonces,
policy.
mantener esa
So,
planificación no
keep that
solamente
planning
en
not
un
only in
ente
one
gubernamental, sino
government
transversal,
entity, but a
que hemos visto que
cross-cutting
ha sido
thing. We've
positivo y
seen
la ley de
it's
emisiones
been
debe de
positive, and the
aprovecharse
emissions
para eso.
law, it's a great example. I don't know who dares with the last one, and then I go to the audience. What is the steps that the development bank can take on the public sector for financing to accelerate the financing of the removal of the coal plants to a more renewable, the role of the governments?
Gracias.
Thank you.
Esta pregunta creo que
This
también
is a
es clave,
question which I believe is key
haciendo conexión
by making the
un vínculo con
connection,
lo
a
que
bond
mencionó anterior.
with the previous
Porque
intervention.
yo como
Because
les
I,
comentaba hace unos
as I
momentos,
said
creo
a while
que
ago,
una
I
de
think that one
las
of the
acciones claves que tenemos
key
que hacer es
actions we need to visualize is that we need to make things happen.
entonces el rol
So
de
the
los,
role
de los bancos
of the
multilaterales,
multilateral banks and the
me parece
government,
clave.
I believe
Justo
it's
precisamente
key,
para lo que
specifically
comentaba,
for
tanto
what I
para el
mentioned,
financiamiento,
for
para el
financing,
riesgo,
for risks,
cómo aterrizar
and
esto en
how
el
to
largo plazo.
connect this
Y
to
también
the
voy a
long
agregar
term.
un
And I
componente
will
más,
also
es
add
cómo
another component, which
incentivamos
is how to
esto para
incentivize
que
this
realmente sucedan
so
las
this
cosas de
so
manera
things happen
eficiente
in
y
an
de manera
efficient
eficaz,
and
¿no?
real
En cuanto
way.
a
So
los
regarding
bancos multilaterales, yo creo que
multilateral
tienen
banks,
una
I
importancia
believe they have
fundamental
a key
porque
importance because
ellos pueden
they
incentivar
can
o ser parte
incentivate
de
or
un
be
proceso
part of a process,
justo como
a
para
fair process,
asegurar
to
una de las cosas
assure
que nosotros
one of the things
hemos
that
visto
we've seen.
y que yo decía en un principio
And I said at
son
the beginning,
inversiones
they are
significativas
meaningful
y cómo
investments,
nosotros
and
podemos
how
distribuir
can
ese
we
riesgo, ¿no?
distribute
Entonces,
that risk?
una de las
So
cosas
one of the
que
things
pueden
that
fomentar
they can
es
promote
justamente
is
cómo creamos
how to
mecanismos
create
donde haya
mechanisms
participación privada,
with private
haya participación
participation,
pública
public
y se pueda
participation, and
compartir ese riesgo. Ese
so
es
we can
uno.
share that
El
risk.
segundo tiene
That
que
is
ver
one. The second one is related to
con mecanismos, por ejemplo,
mechanisms, for instance,
la emisión, bueno, todo
well,
proceso
the
de
whole
diseño,
process related to
y
design,
emisión
emission
de bonos verdes
of green
sustentables.
bonds that are
Y uno
sustainable.
de los instrumentos
One
que
of the
recientemente
tools
han
that
tomado
have
mucha
taken
importancia
high
y son
importance
relevantes
recently that are
para el
relevant
retiro anticipado
for the anticipated
de carbono
retirement of coal,
son los bonos de
of
transición,
carbon at the
con reglas
transition
claras, con
bonds
objetivos
with
claros.
clear rules,
Y
clear
ese
objectives,
tema
and
creo
that
que
is
es
a topic
sumamente
that I think is
importante, es
extremely
justamente
important.
cómo incentivamos
How
esta
to we
transición y cómo
incentivize this
podemos
transition,
nosotros
and
acceder
how
a ese
can we
capital de
access
rescate,
that
¿no?
capital that is not
También
that
pueden
is
tener
not
un
much?
rol sumamente
They can have
importante
a
en
huge
el
role
reparto, en el
in
establecimiento
terms
de
of the
tarifas
establishment of
progresivas
warranties, as
para
I
el
said before,
mantenimiento
in order to
y
decrease
creo
the risk.
también en la creación de
Also,
fondos
the
para la
funds for
descarbonización que sean
decarbonization
utilizados
that can
precisamente
be
para un
used
retiro anticipado,
for an anticipated retirement for this
comentaba
fair
anteriormente,
transformation
y
that I
también
mentioned
para
before, the
asesoría técnica,
reconversion,
¿no?
and
Que
so
tiene que ver también
technical
cómo
advisement.
nosotros hacemos esa
How do we
planeación
make
que a
this
veces
planning?
aventamos al ruedo y
Sometimes we don't do the planning.
eso es bien importante.
I think it's
Y
extremely
un
important.
tema
And
ya
a
por el lado
topic on the side of
del gobierno,
the government,
hay muchos temas.
there are many
Ya también
issues.
lo mencionaba,
It was mentioned by Alex, the importance of the government. The government should establish guide to the path we wish to follow, where we want to go to, with all of these plans and strategy. But there is a tool that there's more discussion in the region that is related with carbon markets, because one of the things that we have seen is that these mechanisms work to incentivize this transition, to accelerate it. Why? Because in the end, what the carbon markets do is to assign a price to the emissions. They allocate a price, and if we remove in an anticipated fashion the assets, carbon assets, we will make those emissions to, well, they are going to have a cost, and this can help to accelerate and make these schemes to become more appealing financially. I believe that that is one of the main points in the discussion in the region with the emission systems, with the coal market, and I think it's a key point that can accelerate and help to this transition. Thank you so much, Jorge. One notification in the sectorial plan that was mentioned by Alex for mitigation and adaptation, we have committed a cap on trade for the energy sector in 3 to 4 years. design and implementation in order to help to comply with the goals, help to technological innovation, and we need to design, of course, with a wide participation. There's a moment, a little moment for questions from the audience. If there's a burning question, go ahead. Perhaps, can I make a comment? Name Carlos Finat, affiliation? You know, I'm concerned about two things that we've heard here, and I think that this topic, right now, they are issuing huge amounts of carbon dioxide that are against this stock of emissions that we currently have. We cannot continue to dilate that discussion. Therefore, thinking about that, we need to design, we need to think, we need to agree upon, so on. It's a conversation that has happened for 8 years since the PNR here in Chile and so on. In Chile, actions have been grabbed, but to install the idea that we still can look for an ideal mechanism in order to intensify the transition, I think it's completely mistaken. We have tools for control, cut and trade, taxes, and therefore I believe that the calling I personally expect is that those things should be implemented. We're talking about an implementation of plans, but implementation, indeed, effectively, and specifically a transition that is fair from the point of view of the owners of the coal assets. They need to take over the risk, and they have benefited from subsidies, environmental subsidies for many years. Therefore, we need to return the investment. I think that in the Chilean case has been great for the companies, such as the case of entities. They have acted in a responsible way, making the decisions against the spreadsheet, and they've seen opportunities beyond that as a recommendation. And the other thing, let's not call about successful case with, let's not call them plans, the success cases. And I'm being very respectful. It's a criticism. It's not possible to speak about a success case for a country to think about do something. Let's talk about how many tons of carbon dioxide we were able to cut back according to a measurement that was grabbed, and that is a success case. If not, we will get to 2050, and I don't think we're doing much. Thank you, Carlos. Perhaps another one? And then the following panel, I don't know if you wish to support. Well, thank you so much. I am Sara Larraín from an NGO named Fundación Chile Sustentable, Sustainable Chile. It is very interesting, and I wanted to specify two issues. The first one, I believe it's very relevant, what was mentioned when thinking about all the supporting technologies towards transition. 6 months ago, a year ago, we were only speaking about change in terms of generation, but not all these elements connected to storage, condensators, synchronous condensators, and others. That is not just the issue related to synchronous condensators. We are just focused on synchronous condensators, and the truth is that it is not enough. We need other energies, and I think that this is a very relevant point, I believe, to visualize, because it is a system that changes, not just the generation. And nowadays, the countries of the region have not been concerned about the support systems to provide the necessary flexibility for those systems that work in a different way. They are variable. They are not stable. The second point, and I believe we still can't point out as a successful case, but I do believe it's very extraordinary for the region that Brazil, when approved a fair transition law. In Chile, we have accelerated the closure, the reconversion of some plants, but the transition, and the same case of ENGIE, was focused in the workers. There's no remediation plan, environmental remediation plan in the Brazilian law case. It's mandatory, environmental restoring, and not the creation of new damage. And also a focus in economy reconversion, local reconversion. That is not in the vision of the Chilean case. I think that Chile might be very successful in the rapidness and how fast they've been. But I think that Chile does not have a fair transition design from a structural point of view. And I think it would be very important, probably, the carbonization plan, the new decarbonization plan, can somehow modify and try to correct that path, because we might be very successful in decarbonization, but very unfair in the sense of not repairing the damage, not to restore the territories, nor the local economies. I think in the case of Tocopilla, or in the case of Huasco, they're monospecific regarding the industry. That is completely key. Yes, maybe there's another question, yes? The third one, and then the opportunity for the panel, and probably I'm going to have to finish. I'm sorry. Thank you. Good morning. Eduardo Andrades from Ascenda Commercialization Association. We have spoken about fair transition. What calls upon my attention is fair to who? Because we haven't spoken about the final user, the energy consumer. The whole issue of transition, the removal of the coal plants, the incorporation of synchronous condensators, and so on, implies costs and certain benefits. Nowadays, in Chile, we are having a very special situation, an increase on the tariffs for the user, the regulated user, that are huge. We are talking about an increase of a 50%. Now, in this whole analysis, I have seen nothing that specifies, okay, what will happen with tariffs? The cost for the final user, is this going to increase? It's going to be kept? Is it going to go down? The offer, when we started with renewable energies, was that the energy cost for this year, 2024, was going to go down. That is not being the case. We always see that in the future, tariffs will go down. Have you made those studies? Have those studies happened to determine it? When and how much? Because that it would be a fair transition. In the end, not only it's not just a concept. As far as I understand, it's good. We need to decrease our contribution on the coal consumption. 2% of the global consumption, I think. And that is thinking about the general balance, and the issue of energy is completely marginal. So the point is, up to which point it implies this transition, a sacrifice, I mean, for all the users in the country. Thank you. With this, we finish the round, the Q&A session. So who from the panel would like to begin? There's one very concrete regarding implementation, not plans, but action implementation. Another one speaking about concentration, what will happen with the communities, the tariffs. It's an open invitation. Who from the panelists would like to participate? Maybe I won't be able to answer everything, but I completely agree with many of the things that were said in these interventions. I will speak about the last question that is related to who pays for this. And I might say that that is already in the heart of what we're planning. What do I mean by this? I am going to connect to what Yasin said. It's not just by planning, but by proposing clear modifications. Regulation somehow must be reflective, or the cost must be taken over to those who can be more efficient, so the tariff ends up being as efficient as possible in that sense. What do I mean by this? Decarbonization plan that we're soon to launch, to publish, has very clear measurements. Even though there's a whole situation, the conversation is with the one focus, that is also a regulatory proposal for us to speak about. For instance, regarding something so crucial as transmission to demand in 100%. Very useful back then to open up the competences to decrease the barriers, but it deserves a little bit of discussion. A clear discussion on the localization signal that we have on the models that expand the system, and the location signal that doesn't get reflected only in the marginal cost. You see that the location of the projects are not necessarily responding to the optimal situation. So we have this type of issues, and I would like to clarify on that. Because decarbonization, as I said just now, we need to decarbonize, but we need to continue to be efficient, because the country needs for the energy sector to be efficient for us to continue to be competitive in an open market economy. Therefore, those two things need to close, need to get to a deal. Decarbonization can't be at any cost. And it's something we know. It's clear. We can continue to allocate costs to agents that can do nothing to make it more efficient. That is also clear. So those conversational opportunities are coming. That is something that I do want to put on the table. And we're talking about, I mean, they're there. We're just waiting the momentum to open up the conversations when dealing with a situation that has been so much more complex than that. Just to round up. Maria Jose?
I wanted to address the issue about going to action and not so much plans when it comes to planning. And I think that we couldn't agree more. I actually mentioned that we used to have this long-term vision, goals on long-term ambitions. We do have them. They are already defined and they are under the law regarding climate change. And under the same law, we need to create these mitigation and adaptation plans that Juan Pedro was mentioning, and it's under public consultation with us. But from the Ministry of Energy, what we want is to connect this plan because it's under the law, and we want to connect them with instruments of public policy that are currently not under the law. For example, the decarbonization plan or the green hydrogen plan. These are great instruments that are not under any law. So those who've been in public service for a long time can agree. We want to leave them under this plan, and we believe that actions need to be as concrete as possible. But of course, there are opportunities to improve. So again, we would like you to review it and make contributions and help us improve the plan. I also wanted to contribute to Eduardo's question. And I'm not going to talk about success cases. I'm just going to share an example of the synchronous condensators tendering process and how these kinds of solutions that had as a main driver to ensure the operation of the northern operation, that with different units, some attributes of inertia and circuit cuttings were being addressed. And what we can communicate is that this investment position in this infrastructure displaced a lot of cost with the agents that are participating in this market are paying a component of forced operation of those units throughout the day. Thank you so much. We don't have any more time. Otherwise, we will skip coffee. So let's go to drink some coffee, but let's give a round of applause to our panelists. And let's stay here because we're going to take an official picture. 15 minutes for coffee. We will go back at 11:15. Thank you. Number
y
2,
financiando la
called
transición
Moving
justa.
Forward in Financing
La sesión
Fair
comienza con una
Transition. The
presentación
session will
especial
start
de
with
la
a
ministra
special
Maisa
presentation
Rojas,
from Minister
doctora en Ciencias
Maisa
Atmosféricas de la
Rosa, Doctor
Universidad
in
de
Atmospherical
Oxford,
Science
Reino
from
Unido.
Oxford University, the
No
United Kingdom.
necesariamente una presentación con diapositivas, sino
It's
que una
not
exposición.
a
Ella
presentation
nos va a
with
contar
slides, but
lo que
she's
nos
going
quiere
to
contar.
share
Adelante, ministra, muchas gracias por
what
estar
she's
con
going to
nosotros.
share. Thank you so much, Minister, for being with us. Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for this invitation. I made it to the last part of the previous panel. I'm going to read my intervention because it's very specific. However, I want to tell you that I was running late because I came from another interesting forum where some of you were also there. So, it's a day where issues on how to do the necessary transitions that we need to do urgently and very ambitiously are being discussed in several places. This was a forum in Universidad de Chile about industrial policies and climate change. I was able to see a presentation over there from the industrial policy in the current government of Biden, President Biden, and it's very impressive what in 3 years and a half they've been able to achieve. In many of the actions that they've been implementing from some particular laws focus on justice, very importantly. We saw some graphs that address the investments in energy transition in several areas. Besides, they are happening in communities, in states, in regions that have been historically more vulnerable. So, that is a challenge that we have in the case of Chile as well. Now, first, I would like to thank you for this invitation. Thank you for making me a part of solutions dialogues organized by the Pairing Past Coal Alliance. And Chile was able to commit to be carbon neutral by 2050. And it's under a law because of an agreement, in a large measure because of this agreement in which we decided to gradually eliminate coal from our energy grid. Chile recognizes the urgent need of taking fast and ambitious measures regarding climate change in this decade in order to face this global threat that affects the economy, the environment, and people. By installing a new development model focused on the well-being of people and the well-being of the environment from the implementation of transition processes that are just socio-ecologically, and the incorporation of an ecological focus across the board in the cycle of public policies of the state as a key part in order to achieve prosperity and the development of our countries in the next few years. The fact that in the case of Chile, we have 5 territories where we have thermoelectrical plants powered by coal, we have this commitment of decommissioning them, help us prioritize these territories so that this transition that is already happening on the one hand can be a transition, as Sara Larraín said at the end of previous session, can also include remediation for the environment, or at least restoration, that in some cases there was an environmental degradation that went beyond CO2 contamination, and also start thinking about how these societies and these groups and communities have a new perspective when it comes to development. In the year 2020, the NDC from Chile incorporated a social pillar about sustainable transition. They provided the formulation and implementation of commitments incorporating each component, having vulnerability of the most exposed population as a priority, as a base. In 2022, in November, our government presented in the United Nations Framework Convention a strengthening of this SDG, where we explicitly incorporated the commitment of having a socio-ecological transition that is fair and just towards neutral carbon neutrality. And this transition is defined as the process that, through a social dialogue and collective empowerment, aims at the transformation of a society into one that is resilient, equitable, and can face the social, ecological, and climate crisis. All of this experience that we've built in common and where we've worked hand in hand with the ministry, with Cecilia, also here present, is being used today for the elaboration of the updating of the SDGs for 2025. The process is opening. Next year, we are going to present it at the COP30 through the elaboration of a national strategy of social economical transition, which is presented as a state policy that is intersectorial, that promotes the productive systems can work towards a resilient system and safeguarding social environmental justice. This means that the social pillar of our SDG for 2020 becomes stronger through the national strategy of socio-ecological transition. It's a big challenge because the vision of this approach is to combine human rights, social protection, in order to prevent not wanted effects in the transition, especially in the labor force, by offering quality jobs that consider training programs and work reconversion, but especially productive reconversion, because we require of economic diversification in those technologies that are low in emissions, the use and equitability of use and access of early evaluation of the social impacts in the environment and in the workforce, and the reparation of previous damages of the inequalities because of the industrial production. And this is present in environmental damages that are very concrete. This is how this transition strategy will be presented as a guideline for the state, for the private sector, and communities for the next few years. The objective is to create a clear transition route that incorporates the needs gathered from the territories without ignoring the productive impulse and orienting the private and public efforts to be responsible for the previous damage, and that's also flexible to maximize the economic and social opportunities of this transition. Just like the Ministry of Energy is now making the most of those strategies under the climate change framework, we're thinking about the same, because the law that provides a framework has all these strategies connecting to the commitment of doing an actual follow-up on a yearly basis through a ministry, to the Congress, and to the convention. And we think that this structure will really allow us to progress in a clear way, with also a platform where we're going to be able to monitor this progress and not just being plans and designs. Just social environmental transition wants to decarbonize the economy and provide support to those communities that are affected because of their dependency of coal, facing difficulties, very diverse difficulties, in supporting the workers and also correcting environmental damages and ensuring that the process is participative and transparent. This plan will especially have a goal by 2030 on a territorial limit, and it considers an urgent plan for these 5 territories under transition, which are the places where we have coal thermoelectrical plants, Huasco, Quintero, Puchuncaví, Coronel, among other regions. Allow me to tell you about what we've done so far. The strategy is underway and it should be ready by the end of the year. But additionally, we created an interministry committee for social economical transition that unites 2 ministries, environment and energy, but also social development, mining, health, education, the Ministry of Women and Gender Equality. And this committee has as a goal to advise the president in issues, policies, institutional transformations that cover the socio-ecological transition. Some of the tasks that we've been able to do is a coordination on the state level of all the necessary coordinations to guide this transition according the guiding principles indicated in this framework law and also in our initiative in 2020. The supervision of the implementation of the transition plan from Tocopilla that started its work in energy and now is environmental, and the creation for the Mejillones plan. Those were the territories where there was no plan in place, and we're doing follow-up on the other 3 where we had previous plans, Huasco, Quintero, Puchuncaví, and Coronel, with the goal of creating different strategies of intervention in different sectors that can help us support investments on the short, medium, and long term. And probably from the more concrete that has come up from this work was the passing of this subsidy regulated in the most vulnerable population, including these 5 territories that are under transition. I think that's my phone. I apologize.
I'm about to finish. So, if you allow me one last reflection, even though fair transition means a challenge and an opportunity for different continents, it acquires a specific vision in Latin America. It is between the emissions that we are responsible about, the vulnerability that the population has regarding climate change. To that we add poverty, inequality of incomes that characterizes the region, especially because it affects specifically vulnerable populations to climate crisis. In this, for clean energy transition means an opportunity, an exceptional opportunity so the continent can deal with historical problems such as inequality, poverty, and the issues that Latin America population has. Now, we wait for this moment of dialogue. It can consolidate a joint vision on the challenges of decarbonization with a transition focus, fair transition focus. Thank you. Thank you so much once again, Minister Rojas, for joining us today, for your time and for your intervention. We will continue with the following guest, Giovanni Pavon. I invite you to the stage. Giovanni works since 2021 and think tank Transforma in issues related to fair energy transition in Colombia, in the region of Latin America, and the global south. Welcome, Giovanni. You can start the presentation. Thank you so much for the invitation. It is an honor to be here representing civil society organizations in this panel. in order to moderate and speak a little bit about the challenges we have today in Latin America, especially in that part of the J, in the fair energy transition. So to understand just right those challenges we have as a region, in the end to identify those very important variables of a just transition and financing. Also, to speak a little about how the state and the public services companies, the communities and the private entities will enter in general in this game that is quite important for, because there are many rules that will be defined, and we need to start having a standing as a continent, as a region, because we have, despite the differences we have in the energy systems, we also have many similarities. And the third one, in general, try to share the best practices. I think it's the most important topic to understand what are those practices that hopefully will become more common in the implementation of actions in the financial sector, in the public sector, in the private sector, and the communities, so this can also be shared on a regional level. We have the possibility to extend many of those learnings with the different countries. Let's speak a little bit about the topics related to barriers and potential solutions regarding financing. First, to understand that the general financing of transition, those lines can be read from different points. They have three different sources and three different beneficiaries. The first one is how can we provide compensation or incentives so the private unions can begin to move forward in the energy transition, even though they have been in the business of energy generation, benefits in the other parts of the value chain of the energy. It's really important to understand under what regulatory and financial conditions they can start agree upon some process. The second part, or the second type of financing, is related to what are those solutions that are key to highlight that might be implemented from the state and also the financial sector, so the private entities can implement this type of solutions. Many times we believe that the privates are the ones that should implement these solutions, but I think it's key to call upon the state not only to create the conditions and regulatory environment, but to get involved in financing. We understand that the states have moved aside from Latin America, in Latin America from these implementations, but I think it's an important calling for the state to also start financing some solutions. And this is the third one. Financing bane or path, what will happen with the social effects that this huge energy transition might generate that is coming? Who's going to finance those reconversion programs in terms of work? Who will finance those liabilities that will remain from the exploitation of mines coming from decades in some parts of the continent? And who will support the workers and the communities that are going to have an impact, especially in terms of work and socially? So three financing paths that, I repeat, have three beneficiaries that are different and also three different possible sources. On the other side, understand that the financing level comes from cost, debt, capital cost, and the future, this flow. We have different methods. From the point of view of costs, might be financial optimization, improvement credits, and especially loans that depend on the results. It's a very important topic that I think we might start implementing. We've seen it in different sectors, the forestry sector. Many times we have this type of loans with results in terms of the reduction of deforestation. I think we can make a comparison in the energy sector, capital cost. Also, we can see how to sell between different investors with less operational costs, so the efficiencies of plants that we have today working might improve. And third, cash flow. It was mentioned a little bit by in the previous panel regarding carbon bonds, green bonds, Well, in general, carbon bonds is something that we have been working on. We have been arguing about it, but we haven't really seen how this, in the region, how this will impact the implementation. Carbon bonds to reduce the functioning time of coal plants. Now, let's speak about green taxonomy. Latin America seems to be moving forward in a fast way in this. Two countries have today this taxonomy adopted, Mexico and Colombia, and we have 6 countries that are analyzing and developing this issue of green taxonomy, which we believe is key, so we don't allow new investments or to catalog those investment in coal, in oil, and gas, pollutant investments somehow, but clearly catalog these investments as investments that go against preservation of environmental objectives that we have stated in different countries, and how to open up the doors so other types of financing can also play a role in the game of renewables and other electrification and other methodologies which we require to overcome the problem, the issue of achieving energy transition. Extremely important, the acceleration of coal. We have the initiative from the French government that a while ago has been argued. The main point is the decrease of the cost of capital for clean energy investment. It is important because in Latin America is known as a region of a higher financial risk. Therefore, financial entities place a little bit more interest to investments. And I think it's key to make a study, a general reduction of this type of capital cost that has been mentioned quite a lot. Energy transition, just energy transition, a fair energetic transition. This is a general map we have among all of these countries with different policy elements for energy and the national contributions that have been determined. The long-term strategies, LTS, where we see that for some countries they have already included in these elements the fair energy transition, and we will see what will happen in 2025, where hopefully not only Latin American countries in this type of elements will do this internationally also. It makes the implementation much more powerful in an internal way, where the national energy policies also, the implementation, the inclusion of energy policies in CNS and long-term strategies is also reflected or should be reflected in internal policies. Here we're missing the case of, unfortunately we couldn't include it because of lack of time. Panama also seems to have included the issue of decarbonization in their new NS. So it is important to see this landscape, and in 2025 hopefully we'll be able to present many other countries that are involved in this trend. Some examples of energy policies focus on fair energy transition. We have 3 examples. The first one, that several countries share the tax of coal with a value that is quite low, that is still not causing a change in the region. But hopefully, throughout time, this value of coal, of carbon tax in different countries will have a value in general quite homogeneous. In case of Argentina, 81, or Uruguay, $167 per ton. In general, we believe that this is still something we need to work on, and it's possible for countries that already have it can start working on that. We have the local content policy in Brazil as another example, where we have financing rates, preferential rates for those projects that use local content, which generates industrialization that is more important in a country with industrial capacity that's quite large, such as Brazil, and also the preference of public purchases. These are processes that other countries have been working, but we need to continue to provide more strength. Another example from Colombia with the mandatory percentage of renewable energy acquisition. In general, this is an opportunity so the purchasers of energy are also forced to buy renewable energy in a reasonable term, but the preparation processes are happening. Finally, I think that This topic, collaboration opportunities, it was mentioned before and during this morning. Of course, it's important to establish in three pillars. The first, regulatory framework, and how among countries can we exchange in a cost-cutting way this regulatory framework that enables the technological, social, and environmental component in the implementation of the national contributions and fair energetic distribution transition, the energy plans and national contribution, so that that box on the previous slide can be bigger. And we have the technological component with several topics, not only the entrance of renewable, but the retirement and also the introduction of analysis of specialized grids for the stability. So because the stability has been considered in the entrance of renewable, the introduction of energies, as we said this morning, and the reconversion plans. Hopefully, it is a possible solution, of course, for the retirement of these plans. Finally, the social and environmental component, unemployment, economic diversification, social acceptance, because we haven't spoken about the social acceptance that renewable energies require for their entrance, and also issues that are environmental for the retirement of the plants that might have an economical impact, but also the entrance of renewables that can also cause an impact, hopefully a positive one, when entering the game. So it's important that in the end, there's three collaboration pillars in the region to be kept in mind. The intention of this panel is try to have some dialogue to dive in these issues related to financing, social issues, economical financial issues, and social justice, issues related to these changes. So it's a pleasure to me to invite my three panelists, and Luis Alberto also, Cecilia Astres, the head of the Participation Division, Community Participation from the Ministry of Energy. Thank you, Cecilia. Veronica Bukasovic, advisor, senior advisor from IKI Project Jet. Dara Singer, senior executive from the CAF office here in Chile, and my colleague and friend Luis Alberto Ojuela, advisor from the Ministry of Energy from Colombia, who will be joining us from Bogota online. So Alberto, I don't know if you can hear us, so you can turn on your camera. We can hear you, Luis. Thank you. Thank you. Very good, Luis. And we start with you. In general, the governments have sometimes policies that are being implemented or that they wish to implement in the different regions. Well, speaking about the topics related to the retirement of electric plants, so what are those demands that you've heard from the Ministry of Energy in Colombia that go directly from the communities, from the territories, from the private entities? So what are the policies that should be implemented in the Colombian case with the disconnection of those plants? Well, thank you so much for allowing me to participate from this such important moment for energy transition in Colombia and in general in Latin America. The idea connected to policies adopted, the process itself we're carrying out when facing those requirements. Petitions not only of the companies and workers connected to the process, but we can go from a fast history on what the government has done when dealing with the transition as such of carbon electric plants and what we are adopting on a community level and businesses specifically. Very fast, let me tell you that the adoption of carbon tax from the tax reform that was presented by the current government to the Congress in 2022 adopted a gradual tariff to apply to carbon, and of course with an impact on carbon purchases, with an application of 25% in 2025, 50% in 2026, 75 2027, and 100 2028. Translated fast into an overcost of almost 50 to 20% in energy, with the disincentives to the capital markets internationally, globally, for the carbon electrical companies in the country, added to something specific that was done by the beginnings of this year. That is the reliability amount, the firm energy for those generators that are willing to invest and having fixed income during some periods. Now, in that sense, the government has aimed to the fact that it should only be allowed carbon electric having this fee per reliability in 2028. This will have an incidence in competitiveness of this type of energy, and of course, with cost efficiency, renewables in the spot market won't be visualized for coal plants, and long-term contract even less. Now, specifically, regarding what you were saying with the communities. In Colombia, we have approximately 1,600 megawatts of plants with coal, carbon plants, and so it is approximately 8% installed capacity in the country. Out of this capacity, we have 470 megawatts from the state with two other companies, Gestelca and Gensa. The rest come from the private sector. Since they are state-owned, we started the transition process with them, applying technological reconversion models in terms of business, economy, and work, with the idea and the prospect of implementing in the following 2 to 3 years. The idea is to scale up this model in the private sector. Of course, behind there's a whole economical, social context that we need to take into account. We should not deny that we have fears, uncertainties in the scenario. And what these players demand are stability, and not only in terms of business, but for the work, labor. They are aware of the process, and many of them demand learning and to be involved in energy transition projects. Even though the national government has traced a roadmap currently with a digital dialogue, business, academic, and union dialogues for almost 6 months in September till March 2023, throughout the country in all cities, what they have managed is agreement in specific transition of coal with more prevention. Of course, this is what will move the fastest, is fastest to change. Key players that are so important in the value chain, such as coal suppliers from the mine to branding, commercialization, and they follow development, economical development. They even have political will that can generate some delays in the agreements that should happen. But in Colombia, we have defined 3 pillars for fair transition of carbon and electrical plants, apart from the retirement of carbon and electrical plants to renewable sources out of the enablers such as the one that I just mentioned and indicated before. We also have as pillars work, labor reconversion, production reconversion, and the development of an integral agreed upon transition. So we have projects on a small scale that are being agreed upon with popular and with solidarity with the community, and we want to enable incentives to different work lines and different production processes. For instance, tourism and agriculture. They are very feasible in these areas of influence. That is, as a summary, what we have applied, what we're working on, and the perspective we have in terms of policies and specific programs in this government for the transition of carbon electrical plants. Luis, thank you so much for your explanation and the explanation of the specific points that Colombia has been working on in general in these topics. Speaking a little bit about what you mentioned, Luis, in terms of dialogues between government and the communities, I would like to go to the following panelist, Cecilia from the Ministry of Energy in Chile, regarding what are these main actions that the government in Chile is generating to connect to the communities, to understand them better. Maybe not so much in the exiting of decarbonization, but other neutral processes. I don't know whether there are different processes, but processes related to energy transition. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about those examples in the territory that we might learn about. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for this invitation. I'm going to try to keep it short because there's so much to talk about. Maybe more than examples, I would talk about the challenges and what we've done. And this could be learnings on the good side and on the bad side. It's very interesting to share these experiences. And given that by decommissioning these plants, places where we have these power plant generators, one of the main lessons learned has been the fact that we need to create dialogue and participation processes with communities that live in the neighboring areas, widespread, multi-stakeholder, not just depending on the company, but rather the state also needs to be part of this dialogue process with electrical companies or energy companies, but also other companies in that territory. And we have an interesting experience in Tocopilla that Minister Rojas commented on, which was a very interesting participative process that we carried out. Maybe it doesn't have everything that you would have wanted, but it was always a good step to start working this transition line together. And another challenge also presented by the minister is the coordination between institutions, because this is a comprehensive challenge, intersectorial challenge in the Chilean state and maybe in Latin America as well. We're not used to working with other institutions. Each institution works alone. And if you see this in energy, for example, a coal plant, work has to do something, environment has to do something, and we need to do it together and in coordination. And this has also been a challenge. And today in Chile, I wouldn't say that it's a successful challenge, but we've taken good steps. The minister was sharing about this. We have a committee of ministers that include all of these ministries, and we have plans that today are being carried out intersectorially with the commitment of the guiding principles. And the third challenge, financing, because what happened here is that there was no specific financing for a just transition, but each ministry involved in this process and called to this committee had to focus or change resources that are on their budgets to these transition areas. There's not an additional budget for this. And that's a huge deficit and a huge challenge as well. I think that's another topic that we need to work on and we need to learn about this. A fourth one has to do with environmental issues, also presented by the minister. We cannot just decommission and present energy projects in other places if we don't face the debt in that area. And this debt is not from the company, it's not from the state, it's everyone's. And everyone needs to collaborate in this process. So the reflection here is to collaborate. And it's very important. On the other hand, we need to dismantle entire infrastructures. And this is very symbolic. And we need to be responsible of the symbolic charge that all these thermal infrastructures have, and the work that we need to do with the communities in order to solve what to set up in these places. And that's where new productive activities come in hand. We need to create new productive activities, and there are several areas in which thermal centrals are in that they don't want any new activity. They want the central to go away, and they want to recover the space that used to be there. And that's a symbolic challenge that requires work, dialogue, conversations. The Ministry of Energy said this at first. Communities don't understand certain things that we need to explain. We need to have a dialogue. We need to compromise. And that's another interesting challenge. And about what to do with new areas, because that's just one part of the challenge that is decommissioning, but there's another challenge in the scale and velocity of installing renewable energy projects. You know, Chile is a very thin and long territory where we need to triple the capacity that we have today, and that is another huge challenge. Added to this, there's a territorial context that is increasingly difficult. There's more distrust, less value towards companies. There's a lot of impatience. They want fast solutions, and there's a lot of polarization. And this is in a very good environment to set up projects in those territories. So we need to be responsible of new challenges. There's a lot of power plants next to communities that don't want this kind of energy, and therefore there's a huge debt that we need to solve. We need to provide energy to those communities before installing projects next to them. There's another challenge of territorial planification. Are we going to keep letting them install wherever, or can we think about requirements of setting up somewhere? And in the decarbonization plan, some measures are being contemplated to improve planification from the state. The first planification that the state does about where to place the signalings for displacement, and then with each territory on how to install there, how to set up there. And we need to see all the impacts and situations that offer impacts, so that we can regulate or facilitate lives of communities, and we need to move forward on how to incorporate the communities in the benefits that these projects might generate, and that's another challenge that we need to work on. That's a very big and very fast picture of what we're doing. Is that challenging enough? Yes, Cecilia. I think that these challenges are present, I believe, everywhere in Latin America. We have a social sector is being moved even more, that understands better that there is an improvement opportunity when a power plant is decommissioned or when another one comes into play. They want to see the benefits, and so from governments and private companies can better educate the communities in these issues, because ultimately everyone has to learn in a process that we are incorporating big power plants, and it's a big wave, and we're going to see what happens in Latin America after 20 years of this process. However, I want to focus now, Dinora from CAF, regarding the issue of this huge challenge, which is financing. We know that there are social challenges, environmental challenges of access to the grid. There's a lot of issues related to introducing these kinds of power plants, mobilization, industrial processes. But I want to understand from the CAF point of view, what are some examples or solutions in financing that you have implemented in the last few years by accompanying governments so that they can provide financing that can be useful for them when implementing these kinds of projects? Thank you. No, thank you for this invitation. For us, the CAF, the Latin American Bank for Development, for Latin America and the Caribbean, our name is Corporación Andina de Fomento. Maybe you've known us with this name. We are a multilateral bank of Latin Americans, for Latin Americans and people from the Caribbean. We've been present in the region for 56 years, trying to support with different initiatives that encourage development, sustainable development, and integral regional integration. And from this bank, from a couple of years now, we have a very pronounced goal, which is to become the green bank of the region. This is a very ambitious goal, but it is necessary for the challenges that we are facing, that we've heard about today, that as a planet and as a region we are facing. And in this way, we are very committed within our strategies, within focusing, financing, and alliances, and trying to find these resources around the world. It's a huge challenge, and we cannot address it alone. And so teamwork and collaboration is important. And this is why part of what I'm going to share today, beyond particular examples that I want to share now, about projects that we're financing in the region, not just as a bank, but also along with other associations, and these are the most impactful part of it, because we also have technical assistance because fair energy transition in our region requires financing. And this is not just an issue of changing one source for another. We see issues here that go beyond. And we've been commenting on this throughout the day. And Cecilia did a great summary on all the challenges that we see from the social, from the community part, from the production side. And this is not just solved by not producing energy with a source and by using another one. I want to also comment that it's not by chance that our economic and development report, which is an investigation in public policies that the CAF does yearly and addresses a particular issue that is relevant for the region, this year is called Renewable Energies, Just Transition for a Sustainable Development. So we're very aligned, fortunately. And this is a study that sets on the table what elements we should consider precisely to join this goal of just transition, because this is a very heterogeneous region and the challenges are very different depending on the country that we're talking about. We have some advantages in some issues, for example, water generation that is overused in some countries, but we also have new sources of renewable energies, for example, in the case of Chile and Argentina with sun and wind sources, not to mention green hydrogen and all the potential it represents. But we cannot ignore the fact that other countries have other richness like hydrocarbons, and we cannot be close-minded and or ignore it and forget about it. This also needs to be a part of this analysis of a just and fair transition. And of course, there are big challenges that are connected to financing. There are some figures of the World Economic Forum that indicate that our region for 2030 needs investment of around $7 billion in order to face the environmental and climate goals for the region. I'm just saying this, but these are very important resources, and we as a bank have set the goal of trying to have the next 5 years $25 million for countries and to support them in their own energy transition plans. How to do this? Of course, as a bank, we cannot do it alone. It's also leveraged, and you were mentioning this at the beginning of your presentation, with issuing bonuses. The CAF has a risk qualification that is better than many countries in the region. It's not the case of Chile, of course, but it is the case in many of our Latin American countries. The CAF issues bonds and bonuses, green ones, also to position the region and to attract part of this investment to projects that can contribute to this transition, the green transition. Another important project within our strategy is alliances with international green funds. The CAF is an implementary agency of the GCF in the Adaptation Fund. It has managed to move resources for over $300 million, managing co-financing, $60 million, $60 billion, and it's not small, because at first, at the beginning of this presentation, you also said this, because given the risk profile of most of our countries, the access to financing is very expensive. So being able to have an open door to these funds, international green funds, makes the access to financing can be even more accessible. And also considering this element as something crucial in our strategy, there's a very interesting case that we are just implementing now. It's a financing program for SMEs, for green SMEs, with the GCF, where they are placing $100 million, the CAF 50, and 4 countries of the region will be benefited: Panama, Ecuador, Peru, and Chile. And the idea of this program is to offer financing through local financial institutions, banks, to SMEs that have projects that improve the productivity of sustainable value chains, that improve their energy efficiency, and that can contribute to the transition to a more renewable green energy. So this is a program that is not just about financing, but also technical assistance, because a lot is said about energy transition, renewable energy, and green chains, but maybe, and especially along small and medium enterprises, they don't know about how to move in that way. So projects like this one, we have several in the region that allows to move towards that direction. And then we've been custom designing, according to the demands of each country, some innovative products, result-based loans in climate change. We have a new instrument that is loans connected to the compliance of social and environmental goals, around $300 million in Mexico, for example, where from the public sector, as you were mentioning before, its role within the energy transition agenda needs to stay a part of this, not just from a regulatory and public policies point of view, but resources and instruments like the one I'm describing, because it provides a cash flow that sometimes our countries require in order to move forward in the compliance of these objectives. Of course, we go along our traditional financing lines for energy projects, but not just renewable energy, but also, and it's also very important for our region, in modernization of electrical systems, and that is definitely something that is going to have an important impact in the transition, and also sustainable mobility projects that also play an important role in the reduction of emissions of greenhouse gases. We are now financing almost the most important parts in the region. In Chile, we are supporting the railway system. We are also part of the green hydrogen initiative, and we're also supporting some electrical companies in their decarbonization plans. And ultimately, with a comprehensive approach and without ignoring the technical assistance, and by listening to Cecilia, I cannot but mention that alongside the Ministry of Energy, we're about to start a technical assistance in order to create a methodology that allows to include those social and participation variables in the disassembling and setting up of new sources of electric generation and energy in general. I extended my comment. I do apologize. You get so excited. Thank you so much. I think that this triangle of the finance sector, the private companies, and different banks, I think that Latin America also has a lot of elements to move forward and to teach the rest of the world, because we're just beginning to have this conversation on how to release this financing on a world level. We are the only ones that are asking these questions now. I want to go back to the issue of how to close this circle with Veronica about employment. There is a way of progressing with communities so that we can see the possibilities of work reconversion, but how can we close the circle to have trained people with private so that that capacity can also be absorbed from the private's point of view? But maybe I would like to hear what are the most important or promising lanes to create more job opportunities.
Thank you for the invitation to time constrictions. I'm going to be very brief. And I would like from the macro to go to the micro and share with you experiences, taking over Eduardo's words from the importance of analyzing opportunities in the chain, in the widest value chain in energy. Not only focus on generation, and I'd like to share with you an example from Colombia, not Chile. It is an initiative that comes from 15 years, and continuously we have been doing improvements And here I have something. I am extremely convinced of what they are doing in Colombia. It is in the sector of transmission of high tension, with the private sector, with an economic interest of being able to comply with their goals, their standards, and also to preserve and improve the efficiency of the business in the transmission, was able to get to an agreement. We have talked about it throughout this morning, the need to collaborate. It might sound beautiful in words, but things must be done. In this example, the private sector that participates from the transmission in Colombia, companies, the tractor companies and the whole subcontracting companies, the contracting companies, the subcontract companies building the lines, have created the first school of lines. Not long ago, the first lines in the world are being trained in Colombia, and this taking over responsibilities on their own by doing something that has not been done before. And in part, we have a local example in Chile of what happened in Colombia 15 years ago. In Chile, we are 15 years late. And all of them together finance training of these lines builders, as I said, throughout a whole year. It is something new, and they realized that they couldn't continue to compete for labor because one would offer 100 or 200 more, and then they would go to the other side. It was happening 15 years ago. But now they do this jointly. It is successful for these line workers, but it can't generate the whole demand of qualified staff required. But it is a support in this component of transition, fair transition, just transition that we are talking about today, which is searching and generating these opportunities of changing the life of people in the most remote places where the transmission lines are built. We're not talking about generating opportunities in the cities or towns, but it's in the rural sector. Due to the specific features of the continent, that is the place where the poverty indexes and the lacks of opportunities are the highest ones. So it is an initiative that we want and we are trying to promote in Chile in a collaborative type of work with the companies operating in the company. And now we have just started by generating this discussion and the possibility to move forward in this sense. Thank you, Veronica. It is extremely important for civil society organization at Latin American level to understand that we can have this type of option and possibility in order to support processes coming from any point of view. Of course, it might be a huge barrier in terms of financing for this education, but by just having a group of people, interested people in moving forward in this type of information, I believe we can make a very interesting change. And in the end, perhaps it responds to a need of coming from the industry, because it's of no use education and training that the industry can't take over in the short or medium term. So it's a very interesting example. I haven't heard of it. Oh yes. And we would be very interested in diving in a little bit more on how to expand in different parts with this type of initiatives. So, unfortunately, we took a coffee break that was way too long, so we have no possibilities of asking more questions from the audience. We would love to expand a bit more, but I would like to give a couple of 2 or 3 additional minutes so we can ask each one of our panelists in 2 sentences, something that is key. What do you think from your sector, from where you are thinking about your experiences? What can Latin America teach or offer to the world? 2 or 3 sentences to understand a little bit about the last question. Cecilia. Thank you. Two sentences. Okay. Two things. One, what was mentioned today during the whole day, and Veronica said it, collaboration, public, private, different key player, it is key. And secondly, it was mentioned before, public policy tools with the clear communication, with a clear deployment and cross-cutting interinstitutionality. Not just the Ministry of Energy, but collective thing with different ministries that will allow us to put some order and work in a collaborative way. Veronica, losing fear is key to me, to dare, because transition to whatever generates fear. And in Latin America, we are quite brave. Yes, and to promote it, push to do things. Yes, the social movement, to know where to go to. Thank you. Yeah, in that same line, we are innovative. Innovators, especially when there's so much adversity. We are used to it. Everything goes wrong. We are the last ones. We do nothing. We don't do anything, okay? But no, the other way around. If we think about it, with being determined, Latin America has great practices to offer among ourselves and, of course, for the rest of the world. Thank you. Luis, hopefully you're there. Thank you. Yes, to me, resilience is so important, especially what we said back in the 70s. And here in Latin America specifically, due to the evolution, transcendence, starting from the energy transition, we require articulation, connection from the Latin American countries. And without a doubt, here in Colombia, energy transition must be a state policy, long-term state-owned policy. Just like when we manage international trade, international or foreign affairs, this is something that we need to do. This should be the focus of it. Thank you, Luis. I think that Latin America is definitely a great example in certain things where we can move forward. I think we have clear cases in the continent, in the region, on how this indifference, political indifference to certain processes, well, this should not depend on the process that is ruling, but with specific policies, with continuity, long-term policies. So thank you to all panelists and panelist Luis. It is an honor to me to have participated, and I appreciate so much your participation. Thank you to the audience also for attending. Thank you so much. I'm very happy. Thank you so much, Giovanni. And the different panelists from the previous panel. To conclude, I would like to invite Mitchell Lloyd, Senior Advisor from the Energy Safety Department Net Zero from the United Kingdom, for some closing remarks. Hi everyone. First, I would like to thank all of our guests today for the presentation and the panels that were very informative, for the sessions on decarbonization. These are very useful. Thank you to the Ministry of Energy, Equijet, for your support in organizing such a successful event, and also our host, CIN, for facilitating such a great space to speak about energy transition. Thank you also, PPCA, and the United Kingdom and Canada's embassy for their work, all of their work in this event. Now we'll switch to English. As we've heard, we've been a public criteria of this conception, and as we look forward to completing our own phase out.
Next month, we look forward to being able to mark this occasion and share our own experiences on the call to clean transition. But right now, I would like to reflect on some of the key solutions that we've heard today on the themes of early coal retirement, energy security, and just transition. It's clear to me that countries in Latin America and the Caribbean are leaders in the efforts to transition from coal to clean. In fact, Chile is one of among the top 10 fastest countries that are phasing out coal, which is incredibly impressive. And in Chile's story, and in the examples from other countries that we've heard, we see the importance of setting a clear phase-out date early, and of creating a comprehensive decarbonisation plan that includes just transition as a core pillar. We've also seen the key role that utilities like ENGIE are playing in closing coal plants early and investing in the much-needed battery solutions and transmission infrastructure to ensure energy security. We also learned about the financing mechanisms being implemented in Chile and Colombia to help retire coal plants early and to support a just transition. That includes just transition plans to help retrain workers so they can find employment in clean energy and help address the skilled labour gap. We hope these lessons inspire everyone to take bold and well-planned action and to accelerate the retirement of coal. In particular, I want to highlight 3 ways in which you continue this ambition and work with the PPCA and its partners. So number 1 is following Chile's example, we encourage you to ensure that energy plans include coal phase-out and a commitment to no new unabated coal, and that these plans inform your next round of submissions for NDCs and long-term strategies. Secondly, we welcome you to look out for the work of the Coal Transition Commission with its recommendations and actions to support the scaling of public and private finance. And finally, we very much invite you to join us as we continue our Solutions Dialogue series in regional countries around the world, including Jakarta, New York, Singapore and Baku, with potentially more events and regions to follow. So do make sure you're signed up to our PPCA mailing list to make sure you're not missing out on any of the action. So once again, I would just like to thank all of our speakers and all our organisers, and thank you for everyone that is watching online as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice Spanish. Bueno, nada que ver, estaba hablando inglés. Ahora, suele pasar. Ya nos acercamos al cierre. Voy a dar un par de notas logísticas y cosas que tenemos que hacer ahora. Finalmente va a almorzar todo el grupo al mismo tiempo. Hay una capacidad, si no me equivoco, de 32 puestos para almorzar en la sala contigua y el staff lo vamos a invitar a almorzar en el comedor. Andrés Pozo, nuestro colega del coordinador que nos ha apoyado con todo. By the way, muchas gracias, Andrés.